The 9,377th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the questions concerning Haiti. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Haiti to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them a document, S/2023/519, the text of the resolution submitted by Ecuador and the United States of America. The Council is ready to proceed to vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall put the draft resolution to vote now. Will those in favour of the draft resolution contained in the document S/2023/519 please raise their hand? Thank you. The result of the voting is as follows. The draft resolution received 15 votes in favour. The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 2692/2023. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. If I may, I give the floor, and to begin with, to the representative and ambassador of the United States of America, Your Excellency.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues. The United States continues to stand with the people of Haiti in their time of need. As Secretary Blinken recently told the CARICOM plenary, we are working with our partners to, quote, help the Haitian people shape their futures and restore the country's democratic order, unquote. Today's reauthorization of BNU's mandate is an important step toward these goals, and the United States was proud to vote for this resolution and to work closely with our co-pen holder, Ecuador, to achieve a consensus text. BNU continues to be a positive force in Haiti. It continues to support the Haitian National Police and address gang violence that has plagued the Haitian people. This resolution encourages member states to provide security support to the Haitian National Police through deployment of a specialized force, acknowledging Haiti's repeated calls for help from the international community. This mandate renewal also asks the Secretary General to submit a written report outlining all the ways the United Nations can enhance the security situation in Haiti. This includes the potential for a peacekeeping operation, police training, or a non-UN multinational force. The United States looks forward to the Secretary General's recommendations on how to do that most effectively. We also appreciate that the strengthened mandate seeks to address Haiti's humanitarian and political challenges. We look forward to BNU's engagement with the government and other stakeholders to tackle these crises, which compound the ongoing security challenges. Colleagues, let's be clear. Our work is far from finished. Adoption of this mandate is a positive step, but we must do more. The United States will continue to work with the BNU, the Haitian government, and the international community to drive progress forward and help the Haitian people secure a more just and peaceful future. We urge all council members and all member states to join us. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I thank the Ambassador of the United States. I now invite and give the floor to the representative of China.
主席先生，海地当前深陷政治、 安全、发展、人道多重危机，局势持续恶化。安理会成员和地区国家普遍对海地局势深表关切，期待联海办更好地履行授权，国际社会和联合国为海地提供更多的支持和帮助。中方同各方的关切和愿望是一样的，在包括中方在内的安理会成员的共同努力下，刚刚通过的2692号决议释放了国际社会帮助海地寻找海地人所有、海地人主导的解决方案，支持联海办为改善海地局势发挥更大作用的积极信号。主席先生，解决海地危机的根本出路在于推进政治进程。安理会刚刚通过的决议要求海地各方开展包容性对话，就政治过渡安排达成最广泛共识，尽快就举行自由、公正、可信的选举，制定时间表和路线图。我们呼吁海地各党各派根据决议要求，真正负起责任，从国家和人民的根本利益出发，以刻不容缓的紧迫感推进政治进程。解决海地危机的当务之急在于稳定安全局势。大量武器弹药从境外源源不断流入海地，是海地黑帮暴力猖獗的重要动因。如不加以制止，给予海地警方再多的支持也是徒劳。在中方的一再要求和坚持下，安理会刚刚通过的决议强烈敦促各国立即停止向海地黑帮及其支持者提供武器弹药，并采取一切措施遏制武器贩运和走私行为。我们呼吁安理会成员将此落到实处，并在审议第2653号决议延期时拿出政治决心，体现政治意愿，就此作出具有法律约束力的正式决定。解决海地危机的有效手段在于国际社会支持。安理会刚刚通过的决议要求秘书长就联合国可向海地提供的一系列支持选项提交报告。中方支持联合国为海地提供更多帮助，同时始终认为解决海地问题的钥匙掌握在海地人民自己手中。联合国在海地30多年的实践表明，外部植入的快速解决方案往往难以持久，难以实现长期效果，难以帮助海地真正走出危机。联合国在采取下步行动前，应充分汲取以往的教训，充分听取各方的意见，充分考虑海地人民的意愿。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China, and I now give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brazil hopes that the newly adopted mandate will provide BNU with enhanced financial resources and the necessary means to effectively support Haiti. We commend the tireless efforts of the pen holders, Ecuador and the United States, and the active engagement of the membership, which have led to a balanced and meaningful outcome. Throughout the negotiation, Brazil's main objective was to mobilize efforts to help Haiti overcome its economic, security, and political crisis. We have consistently emphasized the importance of reinforcing BNU in terms of security, capacity, and resources to enable the mission to fulfill its mandate. We commend the results achieved in that regard. Enhancing BNU's capacity to support national authorities in preventing and responding to sexual and gender-based violence and in protecting children also represent a significant improvement. Additional measures to prevent the illicit trafficking and diversion of small arms, light weapons, and ammunition could also serve as a crucial step in curbing the escalation of violence. In the upcoming days and months, the situation in the country needs to remain at the forefront of our attention. The Council should closely monitor the evolving situation on the ground while considering potential new measures. In this regard, we look forward to the Secretary General's report outlining the full range of options the United Nations can provide to enhance the security situation in Haiti. Any possible security assistance to be provided should fully align with the needs and aspirations of the Haitian people and be developed in close collaboration with all relevant actors in the country. The political viability and the long-term effectiveness of such security assistance would depend on the will of key stakeholders in Haiti to set aside differences in order to collectively address the root causes of the many challenges faced by the country, in particular poverty, inequality, and instability. It's only through genuine engagement and a spirit of compromise that Haitian-led solutions can be achieved. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, я не просила слова по пункту повестки дня, касающемуся Гаити.
My apologies, I was informed to the contrary, but we will proceed further. I now invite and give the floor to the representative of Ecuador, Mr. Ambassador.
Gracias, señor presidente. Agradezco el apoyo recibido por la resolución de prórroga y fortalecimiento del mandato de la Oficina Integrada de las Naciones Unidas en Haití, BNUH, que fue presentada por el Ecuador y los Estados Unidos. Deseo también reconocer el aporte valioso y constructivo de todas las delegaciones del Consejo en el momento en que Haití más lo necesita. Esperamos que esta adopción por unanimidad envíe un mensaje claro y contundente a los jefes y miembros de las bandas y pandillas que asedian a Haití. Llamamos al Departamento de Asuntos Políticos y de Consolidación de la Paz y a la BNUH a asegurar una comunicación estratégica en este sentido. La resolución, señor presidente, insta a todas las instancias pertinentes, incluidas aquellas con capacidad para influir en los grupos armados, a que acaben con el bloqueo de abastecimiento de los mercados locales y los daños y las fuentes de alimentos. Todo esto en el contexto de la crisis de inseguridad alimentaria aguda que vive Haití. Se fortalece el enfoque de acceso humanitario y de protección del personal humanitario. Se incluye la protección infantil como una cuestión transversal y prioritaria, y se incorporan esfuerzos que derivan de la agenda sobre juventud, paz y seguridad. Casi se duplica el techo de efectivos que prestarán asesoramiento en asuntos policiales y penitenciarios bajo el Comisionado de Policía de Naciones Unidas, pasando de 42 a 70, y se solicitó a la BNUH aumentar las capacidades de apoyo y seguridad para que su personal pueda desplazarse para ejecutar su mandato. Se fortaleció el lenguaje sobre las herramientas para combatir el tráfico ilícito de armas y sobre el proceso político. Y finalmente, el Consejo se pronunció sobre la Fuerza Especializada de Apoyo a la Policía Nacional de Haití, que fue solicitada por ese país. Más aún, se solicitó al secretario general que informe sobre el espectro completo de opciones de apoyo de seguridad que la ONU puede brindar, incluyendo la posibilidad de una misión de paz. Señoras y señores, distinguidos colegas, hemos dado pasos importantes, pero esta no es la meta final, sino más bien un sólido hito sobre el cual podemos construir. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is pleased to have voted in favour of this resolution, which extends and strengthens the mandate for the UN's vital work in Haiti. It is particularly welcome that the resolution paves the way for the Council to respond to Haiti's requests for security support in the context of the steeply deteriorating security, humanitarian, political, and economic situation. Only last week, the Council heard powerful accounts from civil society and the region on the appalling human rights abuses being committed by gangs in Haiti. Conflict-related sexual violence in particular has spiraled in recent months, and the ability of people to live their lives normally, to move freely, to go to school or to hospitals has been tragically disrupted. So, like others, we, the United Kingdom, welcome this resolution and look forward to considering in due course the options presented by the Secretary-General. I now resume my function as President of the Council and give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Mr. President, I make this statement on behalf of the members of the A3, namely Gabon, Mozambique, and Ghana. While we note the broad support that the Council has just granted for the cause of peace and stability in Haiti, our position is that more could have been done, and indeed more should be done. We acknowledge the Council's efforts to strengthen BNU's Police and Corrections Unit and to scale up its strategic and advisory support to enhance the training and investigation capacities of the Haitian National Police. We are, however, mindful of the limitations of BNU in terms of the assistance it can provide. It was in that regard that the A3 sought during the negotiations to have the Council demonstrate a much clearer commitment of its readiness to respond to the request of the Haitian government in support of processes by member states, including regional states, put together a robust security force to assist the Haitian National Police in re-establishing public order and peace across the country. We believe that the deteriorating situation in Haiti should compel the Council to give a timely and definite response of support when the Secretary-General presents the report that we have requested of him in 30 days' time. The challenges facing Haiti are, however, not insurmountable, and the resilience of its people attests to this fact. Indeed, we note small but encouraging shifts in the dynamics of the situation and welcome the supportive role that regional states, including the CARICOM, have assumed. This gives confidence that working together and quickly, we can support the people of Haiti to address their humanitarian, political, and security challenges. We therefore thank the co-pen holders, Ecuador and the United States, for facilitating the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2692, which provides through BNU a continuing capacity for the United Nations to support the people of Haiti through its good offices role. While the resolution may not have responded fully to all the immediate needs of the Haitian people, it sets the right direction for all stakeholders to reach an agreement towards a democratic political process and advance a Haitian-led and Haitian-owned solution to the crisis. Gabon, Ghana, and Mozambique take this opportunity to encourage all friendly countries in the region and beyond to sustain their efforts and support for Haiti, especially for the political processes and the restoration of public order. We urge the Council to maintain the situation in Haiti at the forefront of its attention. We must do everything possible to support the Haitian people and their government to restore the glorious and historic foundations of their statehood. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ghana, and I now invite the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, by voting in favor of Resolution 2692, the United Arab Emirates reaffirms its full support for BNU and its role to assist Haiti back on the path towards peace and stability. The ongoing and horrific violence, including abhorrent reports of sexual and gender-based violence employed by armed gangs on the people of Haiti, remains completely unacceptable. The security and political situation in Haiti must be addressed simultaneously. While the Council continues its discussions on how to best respond to the deteriorating security situation, we once again call on all relevant stakeholders to work towards an inclusive and inter-Haitian dialogue for a Haitian-led and owned political settlement. This remains critical for the sake of the people of Haiti and the wider region. We therefore welcome the resolution's increased recognition of the important role of regional countries and organizations, including CARICOM, to support Haiti towards stability and security. Mr. President, Haiti remains one of the most vulnerable countries to natural disasters and climate change. Just last month, we witnessed the heavy rainfalls and floods which followed the earthquakes that hit Haiti. The implications of climate change have aggravated the already dire food, water, and humanitarian situation, destroying critical infrastructure as well as impeding the capacity for humanitarian actors to reach those who are most in need. We therefore welcome the resolution's inclusion of a paragraph proposed by the UAE which recognizes that the adverse impact of climate change and natural disasters are exacerbating the humanitarian situation in Haiti, further fueling instability. We applaud the penholder's constructive approach on this critical issue, as well as across the text, reflected in the unanimous adoption today, a much-needed sign of Council unity. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the UAE for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Haiti, Your Excellency.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Président, le gouvernement haïtien, par mon organe, se félicite de l'adoption à l'unanimité de la résolution S-2023-519 prorogeant jusqu'au 15 juillet 2024 le mandat du BINU. C'est pour moi l'occasion d'exprimer la gratitude de la délégation haïtienne aux membres du Conseil de sécurité pour les efforts consentis en vue de faire avancer le dossier d'Haïti. Monsieur le Président, nous nous félicitons du renouvellement du BINU et de l'élargissement de son mandat qui prend en compte la nouvelle réalité et les nouveaux défis qui se présentent au pays. Certaines avancées sont encourageantes. On peut citer, entre autres, le renforcement de l'unité police du bureau, l'appel lancé à la coopération entre les États membres pour prévenir le trafic et le détournement d'armes illicites, l'appel aux États membres à contribuer au basket fund pour l'assistance sécuritaire et à fournir un support sécuritaire à la police nationale. Il y a lieu d'espérer que des ressources suffisantes seront mises à la disposition du BINU pour exécuter cette tâche de façon efficace et efficiente. Monsieur le Président, la prorogation du mandat du BINU constitue certes un pas dans la bonne direction, mais elle ne saurait à elle seule suffire pour aider le gouvernement à faire face aux défis sécuritaires que connaît Haïti. Il nous faut converger les synergies et trouver des idées innovantes qui répondent à la situation complexe en vue d'arriver à l'envoi de l'assistance internationale robuste tant attendue pour appuyer les efforts de la police nationale d'Haïti dans sa lutte contre les gangs lourdement armés. À cet égard, nous sommes reconnaissants à tous les pays qui veulent contribuer à répondre à la demande du Premier ministre, son Excellence Dr. Ariel Henry. Monsieur le Président, le contexte en Haïti n'a pas changé. Le quotidien des Haïtiens est toujours marqué par les enlèvements, la violence des gangs, l'augmentation des besoins humanitaires à travers tous les départements du pays. Selon les enquêtes des organisations de droits humains, pas moins de 563 personnes ont été victimes de morts violentes dans la région métropolitaine de Port-au-Prince pour le premier semestre de l'année 2023. Plus de 260 personnes ont été enlevées de leur domicile ou dans des lieux publics. Aujourd'hui, en Haïti, tous les regards sont tournés vers cette importante réunion du Conseil de sécurité. La population attend une décision concrète relative au déploiement d'une force internationale. Tel n'a pas été le cas et la déception doit être grande. C'est donc l'occasion, en guise de conclusion, de reprendre les mots du ministre des Affaires étrangères d'Haïti, son Excellence Victor Généus, lors de la réunion du 6 juillet dernier. Et je cite, « L'action du Conseil de sécurité est décisive pour faire renaître l'espoir en Haïti et permettre au peuple d'espérer un lendemain meilleur. » Fin de citation. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Haiti for their statement. There being no more names or no other indications to speak, this meeting is now adjourned. The 9,378th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is Women, Peace and Security, Sexual Violence in Conflict. The agenda is adopted. May I begin by warmly welcoming the distinguished ministers and other high-level representatives. Your presence here today underscores the importance of this subject matter, which is under discussion in front of the Council. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Algeria, Argentina, Australia, Austria, Bangladesh, Belgium, Botswana, Cambodia, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Croatia, Cyprus, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Ethiopia, Georgia, Germany, Greece, Guatemala, India, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Iraq, Ireland, Italy, Kazakhstan, Latvia, Lebanon, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Malaysia, Mexico, Morocco, Myanmar, Namibia, the Netherlands, Pakistan, Poland, Portugal, the Republic of Korea, Romania, Sierra Leone, Slovakia, Slovenia, South Africa, Spain, Thailand, Ukraine, Uruguay, and Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Pramila Patten, Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict. I give floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, мы хотели бы сделать оговорку относительно участия специального представителя Генсекретаря ООН по сексу-насилию в конфликте в нашем заседании. Как всем хорошо известно, госпожа Паттен заявляла о том, что российским солдатам якобы выдают виагру для изнасилования украинских женщин. Затем в сеть попала запись ее разговора с представителями, как она думала, Верховной Рады, в которой она признала, что у нее отсутствуют какие-либо достоверные сведения на сей счет. Таким образом, госпожа Паттен, злоупотребляя своим статусом как специального представителя генерального секретаря, распространяла ложные сведения в отношении государства-члена ООН. Мы хотим зафиксировать наше несогласие с ее участием в нашем заседании. Благодарю вас, господин председатель.
I note and thank the representative of the Russian Federation for her statement. If I may continue, we also invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Noor Hser, Civil Society Representative, and Nadine, Survivor Champion. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite His Excellency Mr. Silvio Gonzanto, Deputy Head of the European Union Delegation of the United Nations, to participate in this meeting. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of the Council members to document S/2023/476, a letter dated the 26th of June 2023 from the Permanent Representative of the United Kingdom to the United Nations addressed to the Secretary General, transmitting a concept paper on the item under consideration. She's just... Thank you. I now give the floor to the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict, Ms. Pramila Patten.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to express sincere appreciation for the leadership of the United Kingdom in convening this open debate on promoting implementation of Security Council resolutions on conflict-related sexual violence. I warmly welcome the civil society briefers from the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Myanmar. As ever, The lived experience of survivors such as Nadine and advocates like Hser must shape global solutions. Survivors are the moral compass of this mandate. I just want to flag, Mr. President, that to highlight survivors' voices, the UN Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict Network, which I chair and which comprises of 24 UN entities, has organized an exhibition titled A Conflict-Related Sexual Violence Survivor's Journey. I really welcome all here today to visit the exhibition in the visitors' lobby during the course of the day. Distinguished members of the Security Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we meet today as the trend lines for conflict-related sexual violence are worsening. The world is facing the highest number of conflicts since World War II, while the number of people forced to flee their homes has reached a first-ever record of 110 million. Rising militarization and arms proliferation are bringing conflicts across the globe to boiling point, creating the conditions for unimaginable and unrelenting cruelty. Gang rape, sexual slavery, and other forms of sexual violence are being used as a tactic of war, torture, and terrorism to subjugate and displace populations. In this time of unprecedented global turbulence, new threats have emerged from the largely ungoverned digital space. Climate-related insecurity and displacement have exacerbated competition for scarce resources, in turn increasing intercommunal violence, including sexual violence. Every new wave of warfare brings with it a rising tide of human tragedy, including new waves of war's oldest, most silenced, and least condemned crime. And yet, the promise expressed by the Security Council resolutions on women, peace, and security, focusing on conflict-related sexual violence, is prevention. They represent a commitment to bring all tools to bear to break the seemingly endless cycles of sexual violence, impunity, and revenge. Even as this council meets once again to take up this issue, violations continue to shatter lives and livelihoods, destabilize communities, and displace hundreds of thousands around the world. The singular focus of this council must be to bridge the gap between resolutions and realities, between our highest aspirations and operations on the ground. Excellencies, the report of the Secretary General before us today provides a global snapshot of the patterns and trends of conflict-related sexual violence across 20 situations of concern. It records 2,455 UN-verified cases of CRSV committed in the course of 2022. Women and girls account for 94% of the verified cases, with 6% of reported violations being against men and boys. Children represent 32% of the verified incidents, with girls making up 97%, a vast majority of these cases. Yet, while the report conveys the severity and brutality of verified incidents, it does not purport to reflect the global scale or prevalence of this chronically underreported and historically hidden crime. We know that for every woman who comes forward, many more are silenced by social pressures, stigma, insecurity, and the paucity of services. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is once again the country presenting the highest number of cases, with 701 violations of conflict-related sexual violence verified through the rigorous methodology under the monitoring, analysis, and reporting arrangements established pursuant to Security Council Resolution 1960. In addition, UN humanitarian service providers reported more than 38,000 cases of sexual and gender-based violence in 2022 in North Kivu alone, including alarming levels of sexual exploitation of children at more than 1,000 sites in and around displacement camps. Against this backdrop, I felt compelled to visit the DRC in June to assess the situation firsthand. I was horrified by the testimonies I heard from women and girls, many of whom had been very recently raped or gang raped and were still receiving treatment. Some of them were completely disoriented and in a near catatonic state due to the severity of trauma. So many of them stressed the daily risk of sexual violence while carrying out livelihood activities around the camps, such as searching for food, collecting wood, or water. Just imagine facing the reality each day that you are likely to be raped, yet having no choice but to take that risk because your family must survive. These women and girls face the unacceptable choice between economic subsistence and sexual violence, between their livelihoods and their lives. Therefore, we cannot underestimate how food insecurity increases the risk of exposure to sexual violence, and how the nexus of conflict and hunger are linked in the complex spirals of cause and effect. Another very disturbing reality is the proliferation of brothels, or so-called maisons de tolérance, inside and around the IDP camps, operating in broad daylight and under the very noses of national authorities and humanitarian actors. Sexual exploitation, including forced prostitution as a basic means of survival, sometimes referred to as survival sex, is rampant. This is sexual violence driven by economic desperation, where women and girls are compelled to prostitute themselves for less than $1 in order to survive another day. It is inconceivable that instead of zero tolerance for sexual violence, we are seeing houses of tolerance. Excellencies, in 2022, my first field visit was to Ukraine, following the surfacing of reports of sexual violence after the full-scale invasion by the Russian Federation. I was struck not only by the occurrence of sexual violence in conflict zones, but also by the acute vulnerability of millions of women and children forced to flee the country in a matter of weeks and months of the conflict. When I visited reception centers in Poland and Moldova, I witnessed firsthand the extraordinary toll on women, children, and the elderly, including their vulnerability to unscrupulous individuals and criminal networks, for whom the rapid and unprecedented mass displacement of people is not a tragedy, but an opportunity for trafficking and sexual exploitation. This March, when I returned to Ukraine, I again met with survivors and heard their heart-wrenching accounts of brutal sexual violence reportedly perpetrated by Russian soldiers. I take this opportunity to reiterate the Secretary General's call on the Russian authorities to undertake prevention measures in line with the resolution of this Council. At the same time, I am encouraged by the commitments made by the Ukrainian government, articulated in a framework of cooperation that I signed with Deputy Prime Minister Olga Stefanishina in May 2022. Since then, my office and the UN system have been supporting the national authorities to implement a comprehensive plan of action that includes addressing cross-border dimensions of trafficking. Animating the trend lines in the report before you are the harrowing personal experiences that speak to the devastating human cost of sexual violence. In Haiti, after having witnessed the execution of their husbands, victims were raped by gang members in front of their children. Many victims were forced out of vehicles at gunpoint, robbed, and subjected to collective rape in broad daylight. In the Central African Republic, a woman was gang raped to death by members of an armed group who accused her of having a relationship with a member of the National Armed Forces. In Ethiopia, many survivors have contracted HIV due to rape and now face a lifetime of stigma and health challenges. In Iraq, among the female Yazidi survivors who returned from Daesh captivity, more than 450 430 remain in displacement sites, grappling with significant mental health and socioeconomic challenges. Children born of rape are still unable to obtain birth registration and identity documents, as Iraqi law requires proof of paternity. The annual report clearly demonstrates the emboldening effects of impunity. The reality is that until we effectively raise the cost and consequences for committing, commanding, or condoning sexual violence, we will never stem the tide of such violations. This year, 49 parties, most of them non-state actors, are listed for systematically committing sexual violence. Over 70% are persistent perpetrators, having appeared on the list for 5 or more years without taking any remedial or corrective action. It is critical to ensure greater coherence between the Secretary General's listing and the targeted and graduated measures being imposed by United Nations sanctions committees. If applied in a timely and consistent manner, sanctions can change the calculus of parties that operate on the assumption that rape is cost-free or even profitable in the political economy of war, in which women are trafficked, traded, and sold. The report also identifies several emerging issues which exacerbated long-standing challenges to reporting and response. For instance, inflammatory rhetoric against UN peacekeepers, including violent demonstrations, narrow the operating space for service delivery and verification of allegations. Nonetheless, nearly 70% of UN-verified cases were reported in the 8 peacekeeping and special political missions where women protection advisors were deployed. While data is not a prerequisite for response, the monitoring, analysis, and reporting arrangements convened by women protection advisors are essential to building the evidence base to scale up interventions. Globally, women human rights defenders, including those advocating on behalf of victims of sexual violence, have been targeted with attacks aimed at stemming their activism. Patterns of sexual violence continued to be used as part of the repertoire of political violence to intimidate and punish opponents and women human rights defenders. In Myanmar, Colombia, and Libya, women, girls, men, boys, and individuals of diverse sexual orientation and gender identity were subjected to sexual violence, including in detention settings. The report highlights trends in the wake of unconstitutional shifts in power, escalating militarization, and illicit arms proliferation. It looks at the complex array of battlefield actors, such as private military and security companies, which have complicated attribution and accountability. It also highlights political and security challenges, which have eroded rule of law institutions, creating a risk of rule of lawlessness. Indeed, the central insight of this year's report is the need to harness the preventive power of the rule of law. The positive impact of our sustained engagement is evident in a number of countries. In Guinea, in September 2022, I attended the historic opening of the trial related to events of 28th of September 2009. This historic moment for survivors of sexual violence was the culmination of a decade of unrelenting advocacy and technical support by my team of experts to national judicial authorities. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, consistent efforts by military justice authorities, in particular, have helped to stem the tide of mass rape, although sexual violence, especially by the plethora of armed groups, persists unabated. Several emblematic cases involving notorious warlords, as well as military officers, have been prosecuted and convicted. On the legislative front, the Parliament adopted a law on protection and reparations for victims of conflict-related sexual violence and established a national reparations fund, with the personal commitment and leadership of the First Lady of the DRC being instrumental to these gains. In terms of transitional justice, some momentum was also observed in the Central African Republic with the delivery by the Special Criminal Court of its first verdict convicting a commander of an armed group for rape perpetrated by his subordinates. In Colombia, the landmark report of the Truth Commission made specific recommendations to state institutions for transformative reparations for survivors. When I visited Colombia in May, I heard from survivors how important such acknowledgement and the guarantees of non-repetition are for their healing and recovery. In terms of the way forward, the report recommends gender-responsive justice and security sector reforms, strengthening holistic and multi-sectoral services for survivors, curtailing the flow of small arms and light weapons, and political and diplomatic engagements to address sexual violence in ceasefire and peace agreements. The report also recommends providing predictable financial support to the Conflict-Related Sexual Violence Multi-Partner Trust Fund for the work of the United Nations Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict Network and the United Nations Team of Experts on the Rule of Law and Sexual Violence in Conflict. Women protection advisors are also a linchpin of our institutional response architecture, and their deployment and reinforcement of teams should be considered at critical inflection points, including during mission transitions and drawdowns. Excellencies, distinguished members of the Security Council, we must focus political resolve and resources in a global context of unremitting violence. Indeed, since the report before you was issued, series of allegations of conflict-related sexual violence have come to light. In the Sudan, since conflict broke out in April, the UN Human Rights Office has received credible reports of violations against over 50 women and girls. In a single attack, as many as 20 women were reportedly raped. This week, I received additional information of the targeting of medical infrastructure and staff providing support to victims of sexual violence, as well as an increase in abduction of women and girls. Both the Rapid Support Services and the Sudan Armed Forces are listed by the Secretary General, and I have communicated to General Mohammed Hamdan Hemedti and General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, respectively, the measures that they are required to take by this Council. It is evident that these tragic episodes form part of the long litany of battles fought on the bodies of women and girls, from Bosnia to Rwanda, Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere. Today, we know more than ever before about what motivates sexual violence, who the perpetrators are, and the service response required by survivors. We know that these crimes do not occur in a vacuum, but are tied to broader security dynamics. Therefore, it is essential to ground prevention efforts in this enhanced knowledge, which is at the heart of the prevention strategy that my office launched in September 2022. We must ensure implementation of Council resolutions while adapting our actions to today's conflicts and emerging global challenges, including threats from the largely ungoverned digital space and climate-related insecurity. The time is now to double down on the institutional and accountability frameworks put in place by successive resolutions. We must act urgently and with sustained resolve to save succeeding generations from this scourge. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ms. Pramila Patten for her extensive briefing, and I now invite and give the floor to Ms. Noor Hser. The floor is yours.
President, Excellencies, civil society colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to brief you at today annual open debate on conflict-related sexual violence. I'm Noor Hser, Advisory Board Member of Women's League of Burma, a civil society coalition representing women across Myanmar. It has now been over 2 years since the military launched a coup overthrowing the elected government, which has generated further conflict across Myanmar. over 33,000 civilians have been arrested by the junta, more than 1.8 million have been displaced, and women and girls are at greater risk of sexual and gender-based violence, largely at the hands of military, but by unturned military defense force as well. Despite these many risks, women remain at the forefront of the resistance to the military, comprising over 60% of pro-democracy human rights defenders. Women's human rights defenders from across Myanmar are on the front lines, providing essential service to internally displaced persons and survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, reporting on human rights abuse, and provided shelter and safe house for protesters. We are unified by our collective call for a federal democracy in Myanmar, and we know that in order to do so, we must not only end military rule, but also challenge patriarchal oppression. Women's human rights defenders in Myanmar face enormous challenges, including threats to their safety and that of their families. For example, the military has issued arrest warrants for many of our staff. This undermines our ability to support IDP and survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. Many women's defenders are hiding or, like me, have been forced to leave Myanmar in order to continue our work. This military has long used sexual violence to attack civilian populations. Rape and sexual violence were hallmarks of the military's 2017 genocide of Rohingya, and Rohingya women and girls who fled Myanmar for Bangladesh, including transgender women, now face higher risks of violence. Since the coup, we have documented over 100 cases of conflict-related sexual violence and gender-based violence. One case, junta soldier repeatedly raped a woman at gunpoint in front of her husband in Chin State. At the same evening, the victim's sister-in-law, who was 7 months pregnant, was also raped by junta soldier. The real numbers of cases is likely much higher, since many victims do not report sexual violence for fear of further abuse by the military. Women and LGBTQR people in detention are vulnerable to torture, including sexual violence. Thousands of women have been arrested since the coup and remained in detention, and 50 women have been sentenced to death for their pro-democracy activities. Sexual violence is a deliberate and systematic target to target women and punish them, not only for speaking out against their regime, but also for defying patriarchal norms. Many women's defenders face both online abuse and tactics that can result in offline violence, false allegations, and unlawful arrest. Women from ethnic or religious minority, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and intersex women, and women who are politically active have been targeted for such abuse. As a result of such attacks, many women feel they have no choice but to censor themselves or scale back their activism. International actors must support women's human rights defenders, protect their fundamental rights, and enable their participation, including at international level. Accountability is essential for ending all forms of violence against women in all their diversity. The 2021 coup was a result of decades of impunity for the military junta, including for its use of sexual and gender-based violence as a tactic to target the terrorist civilian populations. At present, domestic options for justice, including for conflict-related sexual violence, are impossible. I therefore urge the Security Council to refer the situation in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court for war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. As the Special Rapporteur on Myanmar recently noted, the military needs three things to sustain itself: arms, money, and international legitimacy. Women's civil society know all too well that these are also the tools that use perpetrate violence against women in the country. The Security Council should impose an embargo on the sale and transfer of arms, ammunition, and aviation fuel. I also urge the international community to enact targeted sanctions against the military and its proxies, including Myanmar-wide and gas interference. In addition, I urge you to reject any effort by the military junta to hold sham elections, which cannot be free or fair, nor lay the groundwork for a democratic future. Finally, I urge you to build on the progress of Resolution 2669 to continue to demand an immediate end to all forms of violence against women, violence against in Myanmar, including sexual and gender-based violence, and to keep Myanmar on the agenda of the Security Council in open session so that civil society can participate. Currently, 1 in 3 people in Myanmar is in need of humanitarian assistance due to food insecurity and limited access to health care, including sexual and reproductive care for survivors. Local ethnic women's organizations are vital in providing humanitarian assistance to their communities, and they need your support to continue to this accession work. This is an important moment for Myanmar. For the first time, the people of Myanmar are united across ethnic, religions, and gender lines in our common struggle for ending military dictatorship, ensure justice, and calling for federal democratic Myanmar grounded in diversity and pluralism. Now we need your support. Excellencies, I would like to add my statement today with one simple point. Myanmar is an example of how political violence, including sexual violence, is used to intimidate, punish, and silence human rights defenders, journalists, and a women's leader in many other conflicts, such as Sudan, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, and Libya. I urge you today to demand an end to all forms of violence against women human rights defenders and civil society leaders, and to demonstrate by meaningful action that protection of women's rights is fundamental to peace, not only in Myanmar, but to all conflicts and crises. Thank you.
I thank Ms. CSO for her briefing, and I now give the floor to our next briefer, to Nadine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear distinguished Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to be here. As a survivor champion for the UK government, I will be speaking in a collective voice, highlighting the view of many survivors from different countries. I also want to take the opportunity to thank you all for understanding the need and importance of a survivor-centered approach to guide the way we respond to conflict-related sexual violence. Sexual violence is a crime against humanity. It is brutal, deliberate, and intended to punish and humiliate individuals and their communities. Many victims are suffering from physical and psychological trauma, long-term injuries, HIV infection, and some have died as a result. Because of CRSV, some women are having to deal with unwanted pregnancies, mothers bearing the burden of being excluded by their own families and community, men and boys facing reporting barriers because of the stigma related to perceived emasculation, as well as physical and psychological consequences. And often, there are no legal provisions regulating the rape of men. The impact of sexual violence is pervasive and destructive. The sheer number of people affected by sexual violence shows simply how many families and how many communities are impacted and destroyed. In South Sudan, women in Yada camp and the family were already displaced. When we spoke to them in 2019, they were already telling us how difficult it was to try find work and get food because getting out of the camp was too dangerous. They were watching the children die from starvation because leaving the camp was not an option. Many survivors are very grateful for the global conversation and attention on this issue, for the effort in reinforcing legal frameworks and mechanisms to prevent and respond. However, we are facing the challenges of translating the collective effort from a global level to a national level so that people affected directly can have a better life. Many survivors want to see the state take tangible steps that will increase compliance with international legal frameworks and translate their obligation into a national legislation. Having said that, for the state to strengthen the rule of law in preventing and responding to conflict-related sexual violence, we think that first it needs to demonstrate clear action plan and effective action, demonstrate the commitment to uphold their obligation towards the citizen in preventing, stopping, and responding appropriately to CRSV. People need to see the state taking charge of preventing and responding to feel safe and to be able to enjoy the basic human right. Although not all perpetrators are men in uniform, the state should work very hard to restore good standard for the servicemen because most of us want to see them doing what they're designed to do, protecting the people, protecting all of us. And citizens should not be afraid when they meet men in uniform. The repetition of sexual violence keeps people living in fear, vulnerable to further attacks. And when you live in a country where there is no rule of law and where those who are perpetrating the crime get away with impunity, you worry and don't know when you may have an accountable group that perpetrates such crime, and you cannot feel safe. So many survivors have asked me to tell you this. States need to have an organized national conversation about the role of the people in uniform and hold accountable perpetrators from other groups too. The uniform does not give people license to commit crimes. It should be worn by service people who understand the duty to represent the state and protect its people. State must reinforce the recruitment processes and take due diligence measures before allowing people to join forces. And those who work in the forces must receive mandatory training, first on how to protect and engage with survivors, how to conduct and comply with the national and international laws. State must take the courage when having the national conversation about the law and the culture norms and custom, because we cannot undermine basic human rights in the name of religion, of culture. It is the role of the state to ensure the national law addresses issue objectively, putting culture view aside. Currently, many civil society and survival-led organizations have been at the forefront of leading on raising awareness about sexual violence. But we need the state to support and promote such work awareness. And states should be more present and not absent, and be at the forefront of taking the responsibility to raise awareness about CRSV. The state should support and see the benefit of inclusive process, bringing everybody on board in understanding that tackling the issue of CRSV is a national concern and the biggest attack on humanity. States should promote laws that condemn stigma in all its forms and treat survivors with dignity and care. And when this has become a national conversation, we ask the states should work with international partners to identify how the international frameworks can complement the national effort. Having said that, the state should also break all the myth rhetorics, such as why servicemen or women perpetrate conflict-related sexual violence, and some of them include being under the influence of drugs, being away from their wives for a long time, complying with peer pressure during war, and sometimes people say they're sometimes not in control of what happened. And the most insane myth is to blame victims for contributing to the attack because of the way they dressed up and all those sort of things. We want to see states adopting gender-responsive approaches when engaging with survivors. Treat people with dignity and be sensitive to their gender and their sexuality. We ask that first responders understand survivor vulnerability and to not undermine the impact of sexual violence on survivors because they are older or because of the sexual orientation. An LGBT survivor told us once, contradicting myths and misconception he faced repeatedly, that just because I'm a gay man, it does not mean that I enjoy the act. State actors must approach all survivors with the same compassion and care regardless of their gender, ethnicity, and age or sexual orientation. The state should not allow any excuse for someone to violate another person's private space and force them into a degrading treatment. State need to ensure that the recruitment criteria are reviewed, that the process and the armed forces are professional, serve with discipline, accountability, transparency, and clear expectation of professionalism and protection for all civilians. We must not allow the rhetoric that the army is for bad boys or ex-criminals or people who have nothing else to do with their lives. And if the state can strengthen the criteria of who can join the forces by incorporating thorough background checks, this will at least help recruit the right people and reinstate faith in the state to do the right thing for the people. Once we have ensured that we have the right people, we need to ensure that they are constantly trained and have training refreshed to upgrade with the current norms about the roles, duty to protect, and to reinforce good practices. We ask the state to incorporate a whistleblower practice so that servicemen who witness colleague doing the wrong thing can safely report colleague who misbehave. Over 90 to 95% of survivors never report what has happened to them to the police. And there are many reasons for that, including that they have no faith or trust in the justice system or how it will treat them. Conviction rates for those crimes which are reported are shockingly low. That's also caused survivors not to report. Why report if so? Few cases ever succeeded. We should understand that this fact alone can hinder the delivery and access to justice for many survivors to come forward. All our justice systems have a lot to learn and a lot to do on how to deliver justice in a survivor-centered way effectively. We should learn from jurisdictions that are trying to do safe and effective accountability work. I was in Colombia 3 weeks ago and was very inspired to see the country having a national conversation and addressing the challenges with survivors. The opening of micro cases and announcement of a special jurisdiction are all state efforts to respond and prevent. However, many survivors were still very reluctant to come forward, and mainly by fear of safety. So we should also recognize that some states need help to hold perpetrators accountable, and the international commitment can intervene earlier by working with states that are making the effort but still struggling. We can support countries for training of staff, ensuring people understand the international framework, and upgrading national laws to meet international standards. We can help them tackle the obstacle to justice and share lessons learned from other courts and countries. The international community should support states that are dealing with aggressors and perpetrators that are more powerful, and should stop the double standard by quickly condemning some perpetrators and keeping a blind eye on others. All survivors of conflict-related sexual violence suffer greatly, and we should not only quickly respond to some because of their geographical positioning and watch others dying slowly and unnoticed. The international community must condemn all perpetrators and impose sanctions on all of them. And just to give you an example, the response in Ukraine was very good, but there are many other survivors in other countries too, such as Iran, Sudan, Guatemala, the DRC, and many more. They can help create or support additional avenues for accountability for international crime, such as expanding the ICC jurisdiction, creating tribunal or adjudication mechanisms to fill the gap and facilitate the use of universal jurisdiction in other countries. The international response must be consistent. There cannot be avenue for accountability for intervention for international crime in some states and a total absence of response and accountability for crime in other states. However, we must engage with survivors in effort to close the gap between normative framework and reality on the ground. Survivor participation is key in the effort of raising awareness about conflict-related sexual violence, its impact, and how we can strengthen justice pathway in a survivor-centered manner. When becoming a survivor champion, Kobasia and I knew and understood that our role was not about us two, only representing all survivors, but rather figure out how to make a space and create a platform through which more survivors can participate in the work of Preventive Sexual Violence Initiative. I'm very grateful that the UK government understands that and has been very supportive. We were very honored to work with so many other survivors from different countries in the planning of the conference in London. And during the survivor retreat at Wheaton Park this year, together, we sought to establish what proper engagement means. I'm very grateful that we now have a global survivor advisory group that is committed to guide how we prevent and respond and promote survivor-centered approach with survivor in regard to CRSV. And I hope that next time, another survivor from the group will be invited to speak to you, and we ask for more countries to follow suit, to promote champions and survivor leadership. We can learn from other countries' good practices in the way they engage with survivors, such as Kosovo and Colombia. Kobasia and I have had the opportunity to meet many more survivors from different countries, and we have been very inspired to see the determination and resilience. They tell us about their own challenges in surviving journeys, as well as the risks they take in doing what they do. And despite the challenges, the survivors who are leading the work on the ground are facing a lot of problems in terms of their own safety, stigma, and the effort to bring the whole community to understand the value of their own work. They are doing so much with little support from states and the international community. However, many of them experience a lot of financial difficulties because of lack of funding. They cannot compete with big names who easily meet the criteria for funding, and yet they are still doing tremendous work, including inspiring other survivors about resilience and hope for the future. I'd like to take this opportunity to ask that we have an allocated fund to support survivor-led work only. And before I finish, I'd also like to take this opportunity to say that although I now live in the UK and have been able to rebuild my life, what is happening in DRC is very sad, because this is the country I am from originally. And I'd like to ask the DRC government to be more present and not absent in what is going on in our country. You have the responsibility to start this national conversation and raise awareness locally about what is going on. I ask that you support survival and condemn stigma in all its forms. Our people are suffering too much, and the war has been long. And the DRC has become a dangerous place to live in as a woman, let alone a little girl. The aggressor are getting away with what they are doing, and they seem to have strong allies and international support. I take the opportunity to ask the international community to condemn them and hold them accountable, and to stop the double standard, but also responding quickly and effectively to what is happening in the DRC. Thank you for listening.
I thank Nadine for her briefing and insights. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Minister of State of the United Kingdom. Firstly, may I begin by thanking you, Special Representative Pramila Patten, for your ongoing work in this area. You have led this agenda with conviction, with courage and principle. I have had the honor to work with you directly, and we continue to recognize the important work of the United Nations in this respect. Thank you also to our incredible briefers. Thank you to Ms. Noor, Hser, and Nadine, to you for your briefing today. And if I may, Your Excellencies, just to put into context, when we hear from survivors at the UN Security Council, and I want you to think about this very, very carefully, they have been through the most abhorrent violation of their person, unimaginable in every sense. Not only have they survived that particular violation of their person, their private space, as Nadine rightly said, they have survived. They are not just victims, they are survivors in the truest sense. And when we hear from survivors, be it at the UN Security Council or anywhere across the world, imagine the strength and courage and conviction of those survivors, that not only have they survived, they become the most powerful of advocates on this most important agenda that we have in front of us today. So I thank again through Nadine and through Noor to all those courageous survivors who are doing incredible work around the world. Thank you to them. Thank you to you both for doing so much to bring global attention to the horrors of conflict-related sexual violence and to the importance and the central and pivotal responsibility of us all for supporting survivors. Your Excellency, sexual violence must never, never be accepted as an inevitable consequence of war. It is we, the Security Council of the United Nations, which has a special responsibility in this respect. As we reflect over the past years, over the last 15 years, it is this Council which has built a robust framework for preventing sexual violence, supporting survivors, and importantly, to bring perpetrators to justice. And while we may note these achievements, across the world, as we've heard directly today again from the SRSG, from our expert briefers, there remains a gap between what this Council has rightly mandated and the reality which is faced by thousands of people across conflict zones, boys, girls, women, and men. And this violence continues. Survivors, as we heard from Nadine, often suffer in silence. And perpetrators, tragically, go unpunished. We need to be the council for action, not just for talk. We have the responsibility collectively to bridge that gap. This does mean that every one of our states putting the Council's resolutions, which have been passed, into actual living practice, ensuring that important and pivotal access to justice, and importantly, providing survivors with the critical services they need to importantly rebuild their lives. It means states and UN bodies incorporating that important gender perspective into our peacekeeping operations, as we've heard from our survivors directly. When someone sees a person in uniform, be it through the state or indeed through the UN, that should bring hope. That should bring an addressing of their fear. That should bring security and safety. Therefore, we all need to step up and do more. It means that this council, this Security Council, using sanctions against those perpetrators. And crucially, it means that those who engage in armed conflict, stopping acts of sexual violence with immediate effect. For our part, the United Kingdom is determined that the lack of understanding, indeed ignorance, should never be a barrier to action. In this regard, to help close the implementation gap, we have worked with the Mukwege Foundation, and I pay tribute to the incredible and courageous Dr. Dennis Mukwege, who many of us know, to launch a new guidebook on state obligations for conflict-related sexual violence. I'm pleased we've provided council members with a copy of this. And I do ask that we encourage all of us as governments, as civil society, as activists, as civil society organizations, as advocates, to come together to make the most of this excellent new tool. For more than a decade, supporting survivors and international cooperation have been the central tenets of the United Kingdom's Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict initiative. And the prevention element is key. Our landmark international conference in November last year in London that Nadine referred to brought together over 1,000 delegates. And most importantly, it brought together survivors. We've just heard from Nadine as follow-up events of this global coalition of survivors which has now been formed. And this is needed. Why? Because we need to accelerate progress towards our goals. And since then, we have now, as the United Kingdom government, sanctioned 13 perpetrators of sexual violence since that conference. But, as we heard from Nadine, it also requires financing. Our 3-year strategy is also backed up with up to £12.5 million of funding. And importantly, it's providing direct support to survivors. And also importantly, helping countries to strengthen justice and accountability. Domestic, local justice, the evidence is there, Your Excellencies, is best served when it's done nationally, and we need to stand up and ensure that we can support such efforts. We also continue to lead international efforts to support children born of conflict-related sexual violence. And I ask again the question, it's self-reflection on all of us. What is the crime of that child born of this crime? The short answer is nothing. And we should be showing compassion and care and support to such children born of such abhorrent acts. And today we publish the commitments of the UK and our partners to support this group under our platform for action. In addition to our new international alliance, which we launched recently, vice-chaired by Colombia and Ukraine, I'm delighted to report that this has now grown to 21 members. I'm truly delighted that Spain has joined this alliance in June. And, of course, France has also recently become a very valued and important member. All members of this alliance committed to amplifying survivors' voices, sharing our collective expertise, and importantly, pioneering new approaches. Today, members of that alliance, this very day of our meeting, have issued a joint statement shining a light on the appalling reports of sexual violence in Sudan, referred to by the SRSG in her briefing. We have called for all parties to the conflict to end violence, including sexual violence, and for safe humanitarian access to all those in need. And I want to, on behalf of the United Kingdom, thank, as the current chair, all alliance members of standing with us on this important issue. But as we've heard already, it is survivors that are key in every sense. Survivors such as those led by our survivor champions, Nadine and Colabasia. And I can tell you, Your Excellencies, from personal experience, as the UK's Prime Minister's special representative on preventing sexual violence in conflict, that working with such groups, such incredible, courageous champions over the last 6 years, has been truly inspiring and humbling. They guide our entire approach. And as we've seen today, I'm truly grateful to Nadine for her contribution today. I've had the honor of leading this agenda, but also, like others, going into field visits across the world, the DRC, the Balkans, Bangladesh, and elsewhere. And just to share with you how abhorrent these crimes are. When I visited the DRC last November with Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Edinburgh, we went to that incredible hospital run by Dr. Mukwege, the Pansy Hospital. And Your Excellencies, forget for a moment the country, forget who is speaking, who did the visit, but just visualize for a moment that the youngest victim, survivor of sexual violence we met, was 4 years old, a young girl who had been raped not once, but a number of times. And to her, a man meant rape. That is the reality we face around the world. And therefore, I cannot underline the importance of our debate today. And I thank my own team here in New York for putting together the agenda for this meeting. I thank the UK's Survivor Advisory Group. And they've asked me quite specifically to underline some key issues to the Council today, which I'm honoured to do so. Firstly, the importance of a survivor-centred approach in all our work, engaging with a wide range of survivors in the decisions. Why? Because it affects them. Second, the vital role of psychosocial support in survivors overcoming trauma. Some of these, indeed all of them, are broken emotionally, physically, and therefore we need to ensure that that first step of helping them rebuild their lives is provided through allowing them to overcome trauma. And finally, the survivors groups have asked me to underline the importance of ensuring access to justice and addressing wider sexual violence concerns during both war and, importantly, peace. On the topic of justice, we are working on the Draft Crimes Against Humanity Convention so it delivers more effectively for survivors. We are also partnering with the International Criminal Court prosecutor to overcome barriers to justice, including through a new virtual reality tool to help survivors engage directly with the courts. This incredible technology creates a virtual court to help witnesses and survivors give informed consent to take part in trials and help them prepare for giving evidence. It's putting survivors first. Your Excellencies, friends, colleagues, to all who are attending, and I hope many who will follow this debate, sexual violence in conflict is not inevitable. It's reprehensible. It's abhorrent. And it is our responsibility to act. And you know what? Together we can. Indeed, we must. And what's more, we will. So together we can consign sexual violence in conflict to the history books. And with the help of the courageous survivors at the heart of our work, God willing, inshallah, I hope we will achieve that objective. Thank you. I now resume my function as President of the Council, and I have the honour to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Simon Gespula, State Secretary and Head of Peace and Human Rights Division, the Federal Department of the Foreign Affairs of Switzerland. Your Excellency.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie le Royaume-Uni pour l'organisation de ce débat, ainsi que les intervenantes pour leur contribution et leurs témoignages choquants. Nous avons besoin de plus que de l'indignation morale. Nous avons besoin de l'action. Ce sont les mots de Nadia Mourad qui a pris fait ce conseil en avril 2022. 15 ans après l'adoption de la résolution 1820, la violence sexuelle est basée sur le genre dont les conflits persistent, tout comme l'impunité. Au Myanmar, au RDC, en Haïti, au Soudan du Sud ou encore dans le cadre de l'agression militaire de la Russie contre l'Ukraine, des acteurs étatiques et non étatiques continuent à utiliser le viol, les violences sexuelles, l'exploitation sexuelle, l'abus et le trafic comme une tactique et un outil de guerre, de torture et de terrorisme. Nous devons mettre en œuvre pleinement et durablement les exigences que ce Conseil s'est fixées lui-même dans la résolution 1820. Je souligne 3 pistes d'action à cet égard. Premièrement, nous devons investir davantage dans le déploiement de l'expertise et des capacités dans les missions onusiennes, afin que ces dernières puissent remplir leur mandat. Les conseillères et conseillers pour la protection des femmes doivent être mobilisés et dotés de ressources suffisantes. Il faut renforcer les capacités et l'expertise en matière de prévention, protection, surveillance et poursuite de violences sexuelles et basées sur le genre. Il faut les renforcer au sein des pays fournisseurs de contingents et de forces de police, au sein des groupes d'experts en matière de sanctions et au sein des institutions nationales. Deuxièmement, un lien étroit existe entre la prolifération illicite des armes et la violence sexuelle, dont nous devons tenir compte pour mieux prévenir ces crimes. La prolifération illicite d'armes légères et de petit calibre engendre un plus grand risque de violence sexuelle liée au conflit. Dans nos efforts de prévention, il faut utiliser systématiquement les outils de maîtrise des armements et de désarmement en tenant compte de la dimension de genre. Ceci aussi dans le cadre des régimes de sanctions. Enfin, nous devons promouvoir la participation des femmes dans les enceintes visant à réduire la prolifération des armes. C'est pourquoi la Suisse soutient l'Institut des Nations Unies pour la recherche sur le désarmement dans ses études respectives concernant le lien avec la dimension de genre. Troisièmement, tous les survivantes et survivants doivent pouvoir accéder à la justice de manière équitable et sans obstacle. Les victimes de violences sexuelles liées à un conflit ont droit à un recours effectif et à une réparation aux vertus du droit international. À cet effet, la Suisse soutient le travail du Global Survivors Fund qui œuvre à l'élaboration de programmes de réparation centrés sur les survivantes et les survivants. Qui plus est, la documentation de crimes est cruciale pour la poursuite en justice. Défendant le droit à la vérité, la Suisse s'engage par exemple en Ukraine, au Kosovo, en Irak et en RDC à ce que les survivantes et survivants puissent avoir accès à la justice et aux réparations. Monsieur le Président, sans protection contre et prévention de la violence sexuelle, il ne peut y avoir de participation égale. Et comme nous le savons bien, l'engagement des femmes est une condition sine qua non pour une paix durable. Je vous remercie.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Geisbühler for his statement on behalf of Switzerland, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
主席先生，首先我欢迎你来纽约主持今天的公开辩论。我也感谢 Patten 特别代表刚才的通报。性暴力是极为恶劣的侵犯人权行径。在安理会关于冲突中性暴力问题的第1820号决议通过15年后的今天，性暴力仍被广泛用作战争和恐怖主义手段，很多国家和地区的妇女和女童都深受其害。中方坚决反对将性暴力作为战争手段，强烈谴责一切对妇女和女童实施性暴力的行径，呼吁国际社会共同努力，综合施策，早日消除冲突中性暴力，推动妇女和平与安全事业取得新进展。我讲3点。第一，要加强预防和解决冲突。我们的世界正经历越来越多的暴力冲突，全球近1/4人口生活在受冲突影响地区，妇女、儿童等弱势群体面临的安全威胁尤其突出。性暴力、流离失所、人口贩运等风险如影随形。冲突中的性暴力不可能单独消除，只有停火止战，恢复和平，才能从根本上避免对妇女和儿童的伤害，保护他们的基本权益。要实现和平，就要坚持政治解决争端，加大谈判、斡旋、调解力度，就要践行真正的多边主义，将联合国宪章的宗旨和原则落到实处，就要注重解决根源性问题，在实现共同安全上加大投入。安理会肩负着维护国际和平与安全的首要责任，必须在此方面积极作为，体现担当。第二，要采取有力的打击措施。安理会决议明令禁止将性暴力作为战争手段，但这一国际法红线却一再被突破。如果不能有效惩治已经发生的罪行，就难以震慑和预防新的侵害。国际社会必须强化法治精神，将打击冲突中性暴力的要求落到实处，将施暴者绳之以法，为受害者伸张正义。当事国对预防和消除冲突中性暴力、保护本国妇女儿童负有首要责任。国际社会应当在尊重当事国主权和主导权的基础上，支持其加强安全部门能力建设，有效打击恐怖和暴力极端势力，支持其加强法治建设，完善妇女权益保护的法律法规体系，支持其加强人道建设，帮助性暴力受害者获得救助和赔偿。第三，要支持妇女发展赋权。在冲突局势中，性暴力侵害往往同歧视、贫困等问题相互联系、相互叠加，加剧妇女生存困境和苦难伤害。除了和平视角外，国际社会也应当从妇女赋权和可持续发展的角度看待和应对冲突中性暴力问题，致力消除性别歧视和差别待遇，消除妇女面临的生计困难和发展鸿沟。数字和信息技术是妇女赋权的重要手段，也是冲突早期预警、受害者救助、调查追责的重要工具。然而，可靠、可及、可负担的数字基础设施匮乏，是冲突地区女性面临的普遍问题。我们欢迎今年的消除冲突中性暴力国际日， 聚焦科技和数字鸿沟，赞同帕腾特别代表关于填补性别数字鸿沟的呼吁，支持利用数字技术加强对冲突地区妇女的保护，放大女性在和平与安全领域的主动地位、参与水平和变革力量。主席先生，妇女与武装冲突问题是北京宣言和行动纲领所列12个重点领域之一。作为第4次世界妇女大会的东道国，中国始终是性别平等的倡导者、女性权益的保护者、妇女赋权的践行者。中国派出大量女性官兵参与联合国维和行动，为冲突地区民众，特别是妇女、女童带去希望。中国致力于帮助他国促进女性发展，为发展中国家培训超过13万名妇女人才。中国与联合国教科文组织联合设立女童和妇女教育奖，帮助更多女性通过知识和技能改变命运。中国将继续同国际社会一道，为推动全球妇女事业发展做出积极努力和更大贡献。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I now pass the floor to the representative of the United States. Ambassador, Your Excellency.
Good. Thank you, Lord Ahmad, and I thank your countries. I thank your country's leadership on preventing conflict-related sexual violence and providing this incredible opportunity for us today, and in particular for you sharing your experiences in dealing with this issue. I also want to thank today's civil society briefers for their powerful messages, and Special Representative Patten for her compelling remarks. From signing frameworks of cooperation to leading the UN Action Network for Prevention and Response Coordination, the Special Representative and her team have made a real difference. We proudly support the SRSG's mandate, including through financial support, which last year was over $2 million, and we encourage other member states to back this important work. Finally, let me add our strong support for her participation in this meeting and object to the personal attacks against her for amplifying the voices of women by the Russian Federation. Colleagues, the United States is deeply committed to preventing and responding to conflict-related sexual violence and all other forms of gender-based violence. We know that in conflicts around the world, sexual violence is often used as a weapon of war. In Ukraine, contrary to Russian objections and insinuations, there is ample evidence and horrific reports of Russian soldiers deploying sexual violence against men, women, children, with victims ranging from ages 4 to over 80. In Sudan, girls on the way to school are sexually assaulted by the military, rapid support forces, and armed nomads. In Myanmar, the bodies of women extrajudicially executed by the military have injuries consistent with sexual violence. And the Secretary General's report highlights a shocking number of sexual crimes committed by criminal and illegal armed groups in a host of other countries, including in Haiti, as we heard earlier today. The international community must do more to address this profound crisis. We owe it to the courageous survivors who have come forward and those who have been silenced by fear to take swift and meaningful action. First, we must recognize that gender-based violence is fundamentally rooted in gender inequality. We must take on harmful gender norms, and we must empower women and girls in all their diversity. The United Nations and member states must apply conflict-sensitive and participatory gender analysis to ensure our interventions address underlying inequities. These inequities, when combined with weak or absent state institutions, can lead to widespread gender-based violence. So it's on us. It's on us to continue to promote the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in decision-making roles at all levels of conflict prevention, resolution, and peace building. Second, we must adopt a survivor-centered and trauma-informed approach. This means providing survivors with access to medical care, particularly clinical management of rape, psychosocial support, reproductive health services, and legal support. This also means listening to those who've experienced sexual violence in conflict and responding to their unique needs, which will help facilitate their recovery and legal remedies. And this means creating supportive environments where survivors' rights are respected, re-traumatization is avoided, and survivors have the resources they need to thrive. Finally, we cannot turn a blind eye to these atrocities. There must be accountability. Nadine, we heard you. Hser, we heard you. We must use our diplomatic tools to reduce impunity for perpetrators and deter future acts of violence. The United States is committed to exercising existing authorities to impose economic sanctions and implement visa restrictions. I would also like to highlight the Secretary General's recommendation that the Security Council systematically monitor conflict-related sexual violence and include this as a standalone criteria for targeted sanctions. We must all increase accountability within conflict-affected regions, and we can do so by strengthening documentation efforts, passing relevant national legislation, and changing institutional culture. Colleagues, this Council has spent a great deal of time discussing these issues, but we cannot discuss away the crisis. It's time for us to act. The most vulnerable are counting on us. Those trapped in conflict zones who want nothing more than the chance to live in peace, who yearn for justice. We must commit to action, and we must do so with urgency. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I thank the representative, the Ambassador of the United States. In doing so, I now pass the floor and invite the representative of Ghana.
Mr. President, Lord Ahmad, I recall the able manner you chaired last year's open debate on conflict-related sexual violence, especially the interest and fervor you brought to the discussion, as well as your own long-standing contribution towards ending conflict-related sexual violence. Today has been no different, and Ghana thanks the UK for convening this important open debate. I also express appreciation to SRSG Pramila Patten for her briefing, as well as the unique perspectives of Hser and Nadine. We salute the courage of our briefers and their strong advocacy on the subject, as well as the attention they draw to the need for following through with global commitments. Mr. President, as is well known, in times of armed conflict, the fabric that holds communities together unravels. Families are torn apart, civilian objects are crushed, people are displaced, and impunity replaces law, order, and accountability. The breakdown of law and order in such situations is usually accompanied by extreme poverty, hunger, and diseases. When sexual violence is introduced into this toxic mix, the human suffering is immense, with deep-seated and long-lasting emotional and physical consequences for affected persons and communities. To borrow the words of Heinrich Böll, the German writer and Nobel Prize winner, quote, "War will never be over, never, as long as somewhere a wound it had inflicted is still bleeding," unquote. Ghana strongly condemns the unending cycle of sexual violence across several conflict contexts. Whether it is the subjugation of women and girls in Afghanistan by the Taliban, or the use of rape as a tool by armed gangs against members of rival communities in Haiti, The impunity with which sexual violence is perpetrated is extremely alarming and not geographically isolated. We also note with great concern, as the Secretary General's 2022 report indicates, that the growing prevalence of arms proliferation, increasing militarization, and shrinking civic space have exacerbated sexual violence and challenged safe reporting and response. This Council and the global community therefore have a continuing responsibility to ensure that the existing resolutions which champion prevention, accountability, and justice are translated into tangible actions that can be felt on the ground. Mr. President, in making specific recommendations for today's debate, Ghana would like to focus on 3 issues. First, we reaffirm support for the Security Council's practice to treat conflict-related sexual violence as the basis for targeted sanctions against culpable actors. Periodic briefings to sanction committees by the Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict will be useful in sustaining the interest on the progress of implementation of such sanctions. Tied to the global efforts, domestic legislation in support of investigations and penalties against perpetrators of sexual violence in conflict settings would be necessary to right the wrongs done to victims. Secondly, while Ghana commends the progress made in the deployment of women's protection advisors as part of peacekeeping and special political missions to monitor, analyze, and report on conflict-related sexual violence, we urge the timely provision of adequate resources for such purposes so as to facilitate frequent, reliable, and accurate reporting from the field, to enable the Council to take needful action when it can be most effective in preventing or stopping such atrocities. Lastly, to empower survivors, the United Nations and member states, including national civil society groups, should be intentional in the recruitment of survivors to be part of decision-making processes and advocacy mechanisms on sexual violence. This form of empowerment, we believe, meaningfully impacts policy and legal processes and implementation, and helps survivors to reestablish a sense of control and agency, as well as to recognize their own strengths and capabilities in resolving this challenge. In concluding, Mr. President, 15 years since the Council's unanimous adoption of Resolution 1820 of 2008, our collective responsibility to eliminate conflict-related sexual violence and end impunity for such crimes is needed now more than ever. On our part, Ghana would continue to demonstrate commitment to the WPS agenda through our national efforts, but also in our regional and international mobilization endeavors. In this regard, women in peacekeeping is one of the priority themes that we have chosen to be discussed during the peacekeeping ministerial meeting scheduled to take place in Ghana from the 5th to 6th of December. We commend Bangladesh for co-hosting in Dhaka with Canada and Uruguay a preparatory meeting on the theme. We look forward to welcoming all supporters of peacekeeping in Accra to establish practical measures to advance the potential of women in the arena of peace and security. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ghana for their statement, Your Excellency. Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation, Mr. Ambassador.
Господин председатель, рады видеть вас в кресле председателя Совета Безопасности. Российская Федерация осуждает сексуальное насилие во всех формах, как и любые другие преступления в вооруженном конфликте и в постконфликтных ситуациях. Подобные деяния должны расследоваться, а виновные привлекаться к ответственности. Эта правоохранительная деятельность относится к компетенции государства. Меры, принимаемые странами, принимаемые органами системы ООН и гражданским обществом, дополняют эти усилия. Данная работа должна быть системной, всеохватывающей, с учетом выявленных причин и истоков этого негативного явления, приносить длительный и устойчивый результат. Все это возможно только тогда, когда информация, которой оперирует ООН, проверена и объективна. Абсолютно неприемлемо, когда страдания людей, переживших сексуальное насилие, или обвинение в этом тяжком преступлении становятся разменной монетой в политических играх или элементом очернительной риторики, зачастую не основанной на фактах. Необходимо также отметить, что имеется твердая правовая основа для международного сотрудничества в области предотвращения секс-насилия в конфликте. Женевские конвенции о защите жертв войны 1949 года и дополнительные протоколы к ним. Приходится, однако, признать, что далеко не все страны являются участниками этих дополнительных протоколов, даже те, которые активно выступают в Совете за борьбу с военными преступлениями. Совет Безопасности, занимаясь данной проблемой в контексте поддержания международного мира и безопасности, внес свой вклад путем принятия ряда тематических резолюций. Ответственность за данные виды преступлений прописана в законодательстве государств. В этой связи нам не ясно, зачем, как это делается в докладе, обращаться к неким обычным нормам международного права в контексте преследования за совершение секс-насилия. Не ясна также цель использования неправового и неодобренного Советом термина «сексуальное насилие, имеющее отношение к конфликту». Вызывает вопросы и тезис о формулировании неких индикаторов возникновения и провоцирования секс-насилия. Рекомендовали бы вместо подобных умозрительных упражнений больше внимания уделять конкретным ситуациям, делать акцент на правоприменении. Во главу угла должны быть поставлены усилия по оказанию помощи государствам для преследования нарушителей, которые, как правило, относятся к негосударственным субъектам, и важный аспект работы ООН – это помощь жертвам. Оценки и выводы доклада по страновым ситуациям вызывают еще больше вопросов. На чем основаны обвинения в адрес Сирии о том, что в этой стране секс-насилие используется для подавления инакомыслия? Примечательно, что в докладах нет никакой оценки происходящему в Идлибе и за Ефратией. Чем вызвана такая избирательность? Приветствуем упоминание драматической ситуации, складывающейся в лагере Аль-Хоуль, где процветают насилие, проституция, сексуальная эксплуатация малолетних и торговля людьми. Однако не видим, что в докладе были сведения о том, что все это происходит на территории под контролем США и их союзников. Раздел по Мьянме в докладе опять же подается однобоко. Включение в список нарушителей исключительно вооруженных сил Мьянмы на фоне игнорирования преступлений со стороны террористов и боевиков не говорит в пользу объективности доклада. В разделе по ЦАР и Мали видим попытку сместить акцент с того объективного факта, что тактика секс-насилия используется террористами. Вызывает вопросы подачи ситуации в Афганистане. С одной стороны, видим попытку давать общие оценки правозащитной ситуации в этой стране, в том числе затрагивается вопрос ограничения прав женщин. С другой, ничего не говорится о том, как на права женщин, да и других жителей этой страны, влияет изъятие США у Афганистана финансовых средств, которые могли бы быть использованы для выправления бедственного социально-экономического положения. Также в докладах нельзя найти упоминания вооруженных сил США или их коалиций, пребывавших на территории этой страны долгие годы, несмотря на то, что правозащитники публиковали многочисленные факты, как минимум соучастия военнослужащих США в сексуальной эксплуатации мальчиков. Господин председатель, еще, если и могли быть какие-то сомнения в предвзятости доклада, то их полностью развеивает раздел по Украине. Изложенные в нем обвинения в адрес российских военнослужащих являются безосновательными и абсурдными. Они представляют собой не более чем тиражирование фейков, сочиненных в Киеве. Представители киевского режима действуют в соответствии с заветами своих кумиров из Третьего рейха, один из которых уверял, чем грандиознее ложь, тем проще в нее поверить. Только вот секретариату ООН в подобных информационных кампаниях участвовать не пристало. Любые обвинения в отношении государств или сторон конфликта в докладе должны быть достоверными, основанными на подтвержденных фактах и взяты из источников, подлежащих проверке. Однако спецпредставитель генсекретаря предпочитает просто включать голословные обвинения в адрес государственных вооруженных сил, не давая никаких шансов на их верификацию. До публикации доклада Россия официально обратилась к генеральному секретарю ООН и спецдокладчику с просьбой предоставить информацию, которая бы позволила провести проверку. эти обращения были проигнорированы. В этой связи хотели бы вновь подчеркнуть, что мы полностью отвергаем изложенные в докладе инсинуации. Действия российских военнослужащих в боевой обстановке и вне ее подчинены единому командованию, жестким регламентам и уставам, и любые противоправные деяния незамедлительно расследуются, а виновные отдаются под суд. Хотели бы напомнить, что наблюдательная миссия ВКПЧ на Украине и другие международные институты публиковали доклады о многочисленных преступлениях украинских боевиков, избиениях, пытках электрическим током, угрозах и изнасилованиях, подозреваемых в сотрудничестве с властями Донецка и Луганска. Однако эта информация не получила должной оценки в докладах по секс-насилию в конфликте. После освобождения территории ДНР и ЛНР Следственный комитет Российской Федерации получил возможность проведения полноформатных расследований преступлений украинских националистов и военнослужащих, находившихся на территории республик с 2014 года. Российским следователям удалось установить и запротоколировать показания мирных жителей, подвергавшихся издевательствам со стороны неонацистов и националистов. Так, жительница ДНР рассказала, что после того, как ее забрали в ночь с 18 на 19 января 2015 года и привезли в подвал СБУ в Краматорске, она подверглась избиению, изнасилованию и издевательствам. Сотрудники СБУ угрожали поступить аналогичным образом с ее несовершеннолетней дочерью. Жительница Мариуполя рассказывала, как боевики полка Азов, того самого, с руководителями которого Зеленский недавно обнимался на камеру, насиловали женщин, проявлявших симпатию к России, и заливали им монтажную пену, прошу прощения, во внутренние половые органы. Неонацисты из батальона «Торнадо» в период с 17 по 23 марта 2015 года обустроили в подвале школы в Лисичанске пыточную камеру, где пытали и насиловали местных жительниц, включая пенсионеров и несовершеннолетних детей. Это лишь немногие эпизоды реальных преступлений украинских националистов и ВСУ, которые никогда не были расследованы киевским режимом и на которые никогда не обращал внимания представители Организации Объединенных Наций, и за которые никто не понес ответственность. Однако Россия доведет соответствующие уголовные процессы до конца, и виновные понесут заслуженные наказания. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Monsieur le Président, je félicite le Royaume-Uni pour l'initiative de ce débat public qui s'inscrit dans notre marche collective en faveur de la pleine mise en œuvre des résolutions consacrées à l'importante question des violences sexuelles en période de conflit. Dans un contexte mondial marqué par une multiplicité de crises, la thématique d'aujourd'hui nous interpelle sur le sort des populations civiles, particulièrement les femmes et les enfants, qui paient le plus lourd tribut dans les situations de fragilité en période de conflit ou post-conflit. J'exprime mes remerciements à la représentante spéciale, Mme Patten, ainsi qu'aux représentantes de la société civile, Mesdames No et Nadine, ici présentes, qui ont su de manière fort remarquable apporter du souffle à ce débat. Monsieur le Président, l'adoption de la résolution 1820 le 19 juin 2008 et de la résolution 1888 de 2009, créant le bureau du représentant spécial du secrétaire général chargé de la question des violences sexuelles commises en période de conflit, ont amplifié l'écho de l'agenda Femmes, Paix et Sécurité, particulièrement sur la nécessité de mettre fin aux violences sexuelles en période de conflits armés. Ces résolutions ont constitué un tournant dans l'appréhension des violences sexuelles comme un problème de sécurité à part entière. À cet égard, le dernier rapport sur la question nous rappelle de manière fort alarmante que la violence sexuelle continue à être utilisée comme tactique de guerre, de torture et de terrorisme dans des contextes de crise politique et de sécurité profonde, aggravés par la militarisation et la prolifération illicite des armes. Ce constat sidérant commande à la communauté internationale et en particulier aux membres de ce Conseil de mobiliser leurs efforts afin de mettre un terme au cycle de violences sexuelles liées au conflit, en mettant notamment l'accent sur la capacité préventive induite par la promotion de l'état de droit et en investissant davantage dans 3 domaines: la prévention, la reddition des comptes et les réformes institutionnelles. Monsieur le Président, le Gabon continue de placer le bien-être des femmes et de la jeunesse au centre de sa politique de développement et reconnaît le potentiel incommensurable des femmes en matière de sécurité, de stabilité et de paix durable. Nous sommes constants dans notre engagement et notre plaidoyer en faveur de la reddition des comptes pour les auteurs de violences sexuelles en période de conflit d'une part, et d'autre part, en faveur du renforcement de la résilience des femmes qui souvent sont les premières victimes. Leur participation effective au processus de prévention, de résolution des conflits, de relèvement post-conflit et de consolidation de la paix permet non seulement de parvenir à une paix plus durable, mais aussi de rendre des décisions en matière de justice transitionnelle plus justes et adaptées aux préjudices subis par les victimes et à leurs attentes. Nous nous félicitons des récentes condamnations des auteurs des atrocités à l'est de la République démocratique du Congo, ayant permis de rendre justice à plus de 300 femmes congolaises victimes de violences sexuelles. De même, nous saluons le travail acharné des organisations locales, telles que la Synergie des femmes pour les victimes de violences sexuelles, SFVS, qui œuvrent pour une justice équitable et apportent une assistance juridique aux femmes victimes de violences sexuelles au Nord Kivu. En facilitant l'accès pour les survivants à la justice et aux mécanismes de responsabilisation, la société civile locale joue un rôle central dans le processus de réparation, un élément clé dans la restauration de la dignité des victimes. Pour qu'elle soit plus efficiente, nous préconisons une approche globale qui s'adapte aux situations sur le terrain en mettant un accent particulier sur le renforcement des capacités institutionnelles des États, la réforme du secteur de la sécurité et la sensibilisation des populations. Monsieur le Président, mon pays appelle à la poursuite des efforts entamés en faveur de l'appropriation et la mise en œuvre globale et inclusive de la résolution 1325 et de ses résolutions connexes, en particulier les résolutions charnières 1820 de 2008 et 2467 de 2019, tout en rappelant la résolution 1983 de 2011 portée par le Gabon en 2011 en signe de son engagement ferme sur cette importante question qui souligne inter alia l'importance de mener des efforts systématiques pour mettre fin à la violence sexuelle liée au conflit et à la violence sexiste. Mon pays appelle au renforcement du partenariat entre l'ONU et les organisations régionales, notamment dans la coordination de leurs actions sur le programme Femmes, Paix et Sécurité, afin non seulement de trouver des réponses adaptées et durables aux conflits, à leurs causes profondes, mais également à une intégration plus ample de la dimension genre dans les mandats des missions de paix des Nations Unies. À cet effet, nous nous réjouissons du déploiement croissant de femmes soldats de la paix au sein des opérations conduites par l'Union africaine, telles qu'en Somalie. En outre, le Gabon salue la mise en place par l'Union africaine des organisations telles que Femmes Wise et le réseau des femmes leaders africaines, qui constituent des instruments efficaces pour une plus grande implication des femmes dans les processus politiques. Ces initiatives de l'Union africaine méritent d'être saluées et encouragées. Monsieur le Président, le déni de justice aux victimes est une circonstance aggravante dans leur processus de reconstruction. Notre ferme conviction est que pour mieux prévenir et combattre les violences sexuelles liées aux situations de conflit, nous devons nous appuyer sur une approche axée sur les rescapés, sur leur protection, sur le renforcement de leur capacité de résilience et sur la justice et les réparations. Car c'est en pensant les blessures invisibles causées par les guerres et les conflits armés, en apportant aux victimes les soins de santé mentale et le soutien psychosocial dont elles ont besoin, que nous nous tournerons résolument vers la réalisation de notre aspiration commune d'un monde en paix pour les générations présentes et futures. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Gabon for her statement, and I now invite the representative of Albania. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President, and let me thank the UK Presidency for organising this open debate on such a critical issue. I thank SRSG Patten for her presentation, and we pay tribute to her continuous efforts to advance the conflict-related sexual violence agenda, despite difficulties and challenges. Your mandate and work as SRSG are not only important, they are indispensable and must be supported and strengthened as your mission embodies the hopes of countless survivors for justice. We are grateful to the civil society briefers for bringing their perspectives in the Council and helping us to better grasp the painful realities on the ground. Let me recognize particularly the active role played by the UK and personally by Lord Ahmad for the special and continued attention on this issue, including through far-reaching initiatives and projects, including the one that was presented here. Mr. President, when conflicts begin, so do violations and crimes, including the terror and devastation of sexual violence. As we heard, the world continues to experience the shocks of bodies of women and girls becoming battlegrounds. Like bombs and missiles that blow up residential areas, schools and kindergarten, sexual violence in conflict used as a weapon of war assaults human bodies, scars minds, undermines the fabric of humanity and inflicts immeasurable suffering to victims. It is unbearable and a stain in our collective efforts and commitments to respect human rights and uphold the moral grounds of the values we cherish. Over the years, the Council has passed several resolutions condemning sexual violence in conflict and emphasizing the need for accountability. Yet, despite robust normative framework, conflict-related sexual violence against women and girls continues to persist in many parts of the world, used as a weapon to punish civilians, humiliate adversaries, and terrorize communities. This is what has or is happening in many war-torn parts of the world, from Afghanistan to Syria, from Haiti to Sudan and South Sudan, from Myanmar to Mali, in DRC, CAR, and Libya. In Ukraine, reports of women, girls, and children raped by the Russian forces are a painful and appalling testimony of outspread atrocities and severe violations of human rights committed in an unjust, illegal, and absurd war. Truth may be hard to swallow, but facts are always stubborn. Mr. President, the cases mentioned and many others are a testimony of the huge gap between the normative framework developed over years and the actual implementation on the ground. And Nadine, and no, you are right. There are laws, but we need to enforce them. There are tools, but we need to make proper use of them. And one fundamental issue is the difficulty to hold all perpetrators accountable. Despite clear condemnations and call for prosecution, far too many individuals responsible for sexual violence manage to evade justice. High levels of impunity perpetrate a culture of violence and undermine efforts to eradicate CRSV comprehensively. Another crucial gap lies in the still insufficient access to support services for survivors. While resolutions emphasize the need for health care, psychological support, and legal aid, the realities on the ground often fall short. Many survivors lack access to these essential services, including sexual and reproductive services, thereby hindering their recovery and reintegration into society. Furthermore, and worse, social stigmatization and cultural barriers prevent many survivors from seeking assistance, exacerbating the challenges they face. We must do more and better and take decisive steps in this regard. And as always, work starts at home. Member states must strengthen their national legal frameworks to effectively criminalize CRSVs and ensure that the perpetrators are brought to justice. Internationally, we may need to go beyond resolutions. We must come to a consensus and consider sexual violence in conflict at par with prohibited weapons, such as biological and chemical ones. Given the pervasiveness of such atrocities in almost every conflict and war context, exploring other options for multilateral and global support and action, including the possibility of a convention, is worth the time and efforts. It would, in our view, be a valuable investment in what we are visibly missing: prevention. Peacekeeping missions should prioritize prevention and response to CRSVs, Also, increased funding for survival support should be directed towards programs that provide comprehensive assistance, including physical and mental health care, legal aid, and economic empowerment. In particular, better efforts should be made to ensure inclusivity and accessibility for those who are always the primary targets in conflicts: marginalized and vulnerable groups, women with disabilities, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. Mr. President, I would like to thank the Secretary General and SRSG Patten for including Kosovo in the annual report. No matter when and where they have happened, sexual-related crimes should never be left unattended. The severe physical and psychological trauma experienced by the victims should never be ignored, excused, downplayed, or forgotten. We strongly believe that the report will constitute a robust instrument to monitor and document on an annual basis the progress that Kosovo authorities and institutions have made in documenting those crimes and in addressing their legacy by integrating a survivor-centered approach at the heart of all their programs and interventions. In conclusion, Mr. President, addressing CRSV requires collective action, strong political will, and sustained commitment at all levels. Women and girls everywhere are not war spoils. They have inherent rights to be safe, to live in peace and with dignity, to enjoy freedom and equality. Therefore, we must do everything we can to bring perpetrators to justice, support survivors on their path to recovery, and ultimately advance towards creating a world free from the horrors of sexual violence and exploitation. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania for their statements, and I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señor presidente. Le agradezco por la organización de este debate sobre un asunto de gran trascendencia. Y agradezco también la información proporcionada por la representante especial Pramila Patten, así como los testimonios y recomendaciones de las expositoras de sociedad civil. Nos preocupa, señor presidente, la información proporcionada en el informe del secretario general por el año 2022 sobre la violencia sexual relacionada con los conflictos en 17 casos, que muestra cuánto nos falta por avanzar. Deploramos el uso de la violencia sexual como táctica de guerra en contra de mujeres, niñas, niños y población LGBTIQ+, por parte de grupos armados estatales o no estatales, grupos terroristas, compañías de seguridad privada, mercenarios y bandas criminales o pandillas. El temor al estigma, al rechazo o al aislamiento o la falta de acompañamiento profesional hace de este uno de los crímenes con mayor índice de impunidad dentro o fuera de contextos de conflicto. Instamos a todos los estados a adoptar medidas específicas para frenar la violencia sexual en situaciones de conflicto, en línea con la resolución 1325. Además, apoyamos los esfuerzos del Grupo Informal de Expertos sobre Mujer, Paz y Seguridad para facilitar información verificada que permita al Consejo conocer y orientar sus acciones. El tema que hoy abordamos no debe limitarse a un debate periódico. Hace poco, esta misma mañana, acabamos de adoptar la resolución presentada por el Ecuador y los Estados Unidos, renovando y fortaleciendo el mandato de la Oficina Integrada de Naciones Unidas en Haití. Allí, el Consejo condena el aumento de la violencia sexual y de género, se preocupa por el uso que le dan las pandillas en Haití e insiste en que la dependencia de derechos humanos de la BNU cuente con una capacidad específica para encarar la violencia sexual, incluso mediante la designación de asesores de protección. Señor presidente, a continuación plantearé algunos elementos concretos para consideración del Consejo y los Estados miembros. Primero, la prevención, protección y seguimiento deben ser incluidas en todos los mandatos y esfuerzos de planificación que así lo requieran. Segundo, se requiere superar los vectores de la violencia enraizados en estructuras de dominación y de poder. Tercero, se deben considerar protocolos interseccionales de atención a las víctimas que incluyan acceso a la salud mental y que favorezcan una atención prioritaria a las sobrevivientes de la violencia sexual en conflicto. Cuarto, se debe privilegiar la alerta temprana y la promoción de una cultura de prevención a partir de la capacitación, inclusión y participación plena de las mujeres. Quinto, la rendición de cuentas es el mejor mecanismo de disuasión. Se debe facilitar a los sobrevivientes acceder a las herramientas legales disponibles en el sistema penal nacional y en las instancias internacionales. Y sexto, es fundamental la construcción de redes como la de mujeres mediadoras o embajadoras de la paz que tengan en cuenta las identidades étnicas, culturales y de otro tipo, que aproximen las necesidades, perspectivas y aspiraciones de las sobrevivientes. Finalmente, las lecciones aprendidas en casos como Mujeres de Consuelo en Asia, las víctimas de violencia sexual en Colombia o en países de África o Europa, advierten la necesidad de explorar medidas que intensifiquen los esfuerzos del Consejo, favorezcan la reconstrucción del tejido social, la recuperación de la confianza y la reparación a las víctimas, aspecto indispensable para lograr una paz verdadera y sostenible. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, dear colleagues, I thank the United Kingdom for organizing today's debate and the briefers for their comprehensive presentations. Brazil seizes this opportunity to commend Special Representative Pramila Patten and her office for their crucial work and commitment to combating sexual violence in conflict. I also thank civil society briefers for their testimonials. Civil society plays a key role in working with victims of conflict-related sexual violence, giving them ways to move forward after being target of such an abhorrent crime. I salute the meaningful presence of so many representatives of countries also deeply concerned and engaged in this issue. Mr. President, sexual violence adds an extra layer of suffering to the already dreadful reality of war. It inflicts long-lasting psychological trauma on victims, destroying social fabric and jeopardizing efforts towards peace and development. Over 15 years since the unanimous adoption of Resolution 1820, 2008, the United Nations has accomplished some advances in addressing this issue. For instance, the establishment of the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict and the launch of the Framework for the Prevention of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence in September 2022. The Commission of Sexual Violence in Conflict is directly related to impunity, which unfortunately remains usual in most conflicts. Holding offenders accountable should be the bare minimum response provided by states. Delivering justice to victims sends a clear message of zero tolerance with such crimes and helps to prevent their recurrence. Yet the Secretary General report sheds light on the need to invest financial as well as human resources to support embattled states in providing justice. The process, which culminated with the inauguration of the ad hoc tribunal in Guinea-Conakry, shows the need of such investment. Another key measure to ensure accountability and to provide lasting peace is including references to the situation of those who have been subjected to sexual violence during conflict and its aftermath in peace agreements and post-conflict arrangements. As shown in the Framework for the Prevention of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence, gender-based violence drivers such as patriarchal norms and rules, gender inequality, as well as gender discriminatory laws and rules, to name a few, play a key role in inciting the commission of these crimes. Thus, states should also address these drivers in their efforts against conflict-related sexual violations. For instance, by promoting full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in decision-making processes and peace talks. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
President, I begin by thanking the United Kingdom for convening today's open debate. We also thank Special Representative Pramila Patten and the briefers, Ms. Hser and Nadine, for their courageous calls to action and clear recommendations. As a tactic of war, torture, and terrorism, sexual violence shatters the lives of survivors, their families, and communities. In the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, armed groups use sexual violence to control territory and natural resources as attacks in and around internally displaced camps escalate. In Ukraine, large-scale displacement has increased trafficking for the purposes of sexual exploitation. In Haiti, gangs regularly kidnap women and girls, while arbitrary arrests in Myanmar have separated children from their parents, increasing their risk of forced marriage and human trafficking. Verified incidents in South Sudan doubled in 2022. Conflict-related sexual violence is often directed at human rights defenders, while in Colombia, illegal armed groups enforce patriarchal social norms through violence by targeting LGBTQI persons. States have an obligation to ensure a safe, enabling environment for civil society and to protect women active in public life from reprisals. We are deeply concerned that the Taliban's relentless and systematic gender persecution in Afghanistan has created an environment of pervasive impunity. The glaring gap between the Security Council's standards and commitments to prevent and respond to conflict-related sexual violence and the horrifying reality for victims and survivors must be closed. In this respect, we would like to highlight three priorities. First, preventing conflict-related sexual violence and improving protection requires survivor-centered approaches that ensure access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health services and strengthen the capacity of women and survivor-led organizations. This is especially crucial when health services are attacked, as reported in Sudan, where women and girls on the move are being terrorized by sexual and gender-based violence. It requires effective partnerships and trust between local communities and the UN. It also requires the deployment of women's protection advisors to all relevant situations of concern. Furthermore, gender must be incorporated systematically into risk assessments, monitoring and reporting, operational and tactical planning, budgets, and concepts of operation. Second, by stopping the illicit transfer and trade of weapons and ammunition to non-state actors, mercenary groups, and individuals, we can counteract the growing links between militarization and sexual violence and exploitation. Third, the Security Council can more proactively use targeted sanctions against those who perpetrate and direct sexual violence in conflict. We fully support the SRSG's recommendation that the Council ensures conflict-related sexual violence is monitored systematically. We firmly believe that targeted sanctions can be used effectively to deter the commission of violence by all parties, including mercenaries and private military and security companies. More than 70% of the parties listed in the SRSG's report are persistent perpetrators. These verified cases should be aligned with the work of sanctions committees and their panels of experts, who should have access to this data and expertise on conflict-related sexual violence. Briefings by the Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict to sanctions committees can greatly facilitate this important work. President, all member states have a role to play in strengthening accountability and fostering a gender-responsive security sector. This cannot be done without responding to structural gender inequality and harmful social norms. As a shared commitment holder on women, peace and security, Malta reaffirms its commitment to advancing these priorities. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, At the outset, I would like to thank the United Kingdom for organizing this important debate and its unwavering dedication to the cause of ending sexual violence and conflict once and for all. I would also like to thank Lord Ahmad for presiding over this meeting. I also thank Special Representative Patten for her detailed briefing today and reaffirm our full support for her mandate and the tireless work of her office. We listened carefully to Ms. Na and Ms. Nadine, and I want to thank Ms. Nadine in particular for sharing her personal and heart-wrenching testimony with us today. The voices and recommendations of survivors are critical for this Council's work. The United Arab Emirates condemns all acts of sexual and gender-based violence, particularly in conflict. As co-chair of the Informal Expert Group on Women, Peace and Security, alongside Switzerland, and as a member of the International Alliance on Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflict, a UK-led initiative, the UAE remains a steadfast partner in strengthening the global response to these crimes. 15 years have passed since this very Council adopted Resolution 1820, which condemned sexual violence as a tactic of war and an obstacle to peace building. Since then, the international community has taken important steps, but much remains to be done. In this regard, I wish to share 3 points today. First, we need to bolster survivors' access to necessary services and support. This requires taking into consideration the needs of women and girls, from early warning mechanisms to humanitarian aid provision. These efforts can only be successful if carried out with a whole-of-society approach throughout the entire conflict continuum. We must include women and youth, as well as religious, community, and education leaders in the design and implementation of gender-responsive strategies. These, in turn, can act as one of the key pathways to the prevention of such crimes. This is critical across ongoing conflicts, including the Democratic Republic of Congo and Sudan, where we continue to receive increasing reports of conflict-related sexual violence. Second, prevention of these crimes demands strengthened national judicial institutions and consistent implementation of the rule of law. National authorities with robust judicial institutions stand a much better chance of countering sexual and gender-based violence. This could certainly be the case in Haiti, where gangs employ these heinous acts as a weapon to terrorize, abuse, and control populations. The UN's capacity-building expertise should also be leveraged to bolster survivor-centered justice and accountability. This includes supporting those who are uniquely positioned to engage with national government entities, such as peace operations, as well as engaging with entities with expertise, such as the UN team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence. Close cooperation with the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict and UN Women can also strengthen global norms and standards for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. To this end, I'm pleased to share that last month, the UAE renewed its commitment to UN Women and pledged an additional $15 million over the next 3 years. Third, we must utilize technology and education to combat the shifting nature of these crimes. In recent years, the threat has metastasized from a physical threat to one that pervades the online space. When the threats evolve, so too must our tools to protect against them. We do not need to be overly creative. Even commonly used digital technologies such as WhatsApp can provide access to reporting mechanisms and protection networks. Echoing Shabana Basij Rasikh during the Afghanistan briefing last month, ensuring equal accessibility to technology can be a lifeline to women and girls at risk. Education must also be deployed to tackle the root causes of these crimes, such as gender discrimination, hate speech, and incitement to violence. Education has the potential to promote gender equality and eliminate stigma. Just last month, the Council unanimously adopted Resolution 2686, co-led by the UAE and the UK, which urged member states to support quality education that promotes the principles of tolerance to prevent sexual and gender-based violence. Mr. President, to conclude, we have seen promising progress. In the normative framework, there are women's protection advisors in UN peace operations, and these abhorrent crimes are included as a listing criterion in various UN sanctions regimes. Reparations for survivors, as well as increased access to data, also speak to the direction of travel of our efforts. By enhancing our commitment and advancing these gains, the international community can better address these heinous crimes and provide women and girls with the protection and dignity they need and deserve. We have the mechanisms in place. It is high time for their implementation. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Mr. President, I thank you for convening this important open debate on conflict-related sexual violence and SRSG Patten and the civil society representatives for their comprehensive briefings. Sexual violence in conflict is a serious crime that violates human dignity and consequently threatens international peace and security. Japan is deeply concerned with the latest Secretary General's report pointing out the alarming persistence of sexual violence and weakening of the rule of law in countries in conflict such as Afghanistan, DRC, Ethiopia, Haiti, South Sudan, and Ukraine. In the context of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, we profoundly regret that the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine and the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine have documented in detail and brought to light the distressing reality of sexual violence as a method of torture and inhumane treatment inflicted upon innocent civilians and prisoners of war. In this regard, it is welcoming that Ms. Patten signed a framework of cooperation with the government of Ukraine to prevent and respond to conflict-related sexual violence. Mr. President, Japan has consistently demonstrated its proactive stance in addressing CRSV and has adhered to pertinent Security Council resolutions. We firmly believe that establishing robust judicial institutions and holding perpetrators accountable is crucial in deterring CRSV, a principle emphasized in numerous resolutions, including Resolution 2467. To translate this belief into action, Japan has played a pivotal role in supporting the operation of the International Criminal Court and stands as its largest financial contributor. Since 2014, Japan has also lent support to the team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence in conflict, operating under the Office of the SRSG-SVC. Through this engagement, Japan has actively bolstered the judiciaries in countries like the DRC, Central Africa, Somalia, and Iraq, with the aim of enabling effective prosecutions of perpetrators. One of the concrete outcomes through these efforts is the implementation of charges against the leaders of an armed group following a mobile court hearing in the DRC. Recognizing the significance of addressing the practical needs of survivors who continue to endure immense suffering, Japan places utmost importance on providing timely and comprehensive assistance. We have supported CRSV survivors through initiatives such as UN Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict, focusing on areas like psychosocial care and access to justice, whose invaluable works are currently displayed in the South Lobby under the title A Conflict-Related Sexual Violence Survivor's Journey. Additionally, Japan actively contributes to multilateral frameworks, including the Global Fund for Survivors of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence and the Trust Fund for Victims of the ICC. I am pleased to emphasize that the endeavors mentioned above are well represented in a key component of Japan's Third National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, which was unveiled in April of this year. Furthermore, this recent action plan specifically acknowledges the importance of providing support to survivors, encompassing individuals of all genders, including males and those who identify as gender non-conforming. We are committed to the implementation of the action plan in a transparent manner by ensuring periodic external evaluations and feedback from civil society. Mr. President, a holistic response to CRSV requires cooperation across member states, the UN system, CSOs, and other stakeholders. Japan demonstrated this cooperation by successfully co-facilitating the General Assembly Resolution 76/304 on international cooperation for access to justice, remedies, and assistance for survivors of sexual violence. In conclusion, Japan will continue to make its utmost efforts to eliminate CRSV, including by promoting the implementation of relevant Security Council resolutions wherever they take place. As has been stated by today's civil society representatives, our approach should be consistent, no double standard. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie la représentante spéciale du secrétaire général, Madame Patten, ainsi que nos intervenantes pour leur engagement sans faille sur le terrain. Je voudrais également remercier le Royaume-Uni pour son leadership et son engagement sur ce sujet important qu'illustre l'organisation de ce débat aujourd'hui. Je salue tous les États engagés pour mettre fin aux violences sexuelles et agissent en faveur de l'agenda Femmes, Paix et Sécurité. J'insisterai sur 5 points. Tout d'abord, je redis notre plein soutien au mandat de la représentante spéciale. Madame, votre rôle d'alerte et de documentation impartiale est essentiel. La dignité humaine et l'intérêt des femmes et des filles doivent toujours primer. Nous continuerons de nous assurer de la prise en compte des violences sexuelles liées au conflit dans le suivi des crises par ce Conseil. Nous partageons les préoccupations exprimées dans le dernier rapport annuel du secrétaire général sur les violences sexuelles en temps de conflit. En 2023 encore, la guerre d'agression que mène la Russie contre l'Ukraine donne lieu à des violences sexuelles utilisées comme armes de guerre et de torture contre des femmes, des hommes et des enfants. Le rapport documente aussi les exactions commises en République démocratique du Congo, au Soudan, en Birmanie et dans de nombreuses parties du monde. Nous avons entendu tout à l'heure la situation à Haïti dans ce cadre. La France condamne ces violences et exprime sa solidarité avec les victimes. Deuxièmement, nous devons collectivement lutter contre l'impunité. Face à ces violences, nous devons suivre une politique de tolérance zéro. Les auteurs de ces exactions doivent rendre des comptes. Le travail de documentation par les Nations Unies et d'enquête des juridictions nationales et internationales sont à cet égard indispensables. Nous appuyons la stratégie élaborée par la Cour pénale internationale sur ce sujet et appuyons cette juridiction avec des moyens humains et financiers. Le rapport du secrétaire général mentionne le rôle essentiel du déploiement de spécialistes pour protéger les victimes, analyser et enquêter sur les violences sexuelles en temps de conflit. Nous soutenons la prise en compte de ces préoccupations dans toutes les opérations de paix. Ce Conseil doit aussi mettre en œuvre tous les outils à sa disposition et en particulier les sanctions contre les auteurs de violences sexuelles. Elles représentent une mesure de dissuasion qui doit être utilisée. Nous soutenons votre rôle, Madame la représentante spéciale, devant le comité des sanctions à cet égard. Troisièmement, nous nous tenons aux côtés des victimes et des survivantes de violences sexuelles. La prise en charge doit être globale et les survivantes doivent pouvoir y accéder, y compris lorsque les procédures judiciaires sont inaccessibles ou bloquées. C'est pourquoi la France finance le Fonds mondial pour les survivants et survivantes de violences sexuelles liées au conflit créé par le docteur Denis Mukwege et Nadia Mourad à hauteur de 8,2 millions d'euros. Quatrièmement, pour prévenir les violences sexuelles et leurs conséquences, nous devons renforcer la participation des femmes et lutter contre les inégalités de genre et les préjugés ainsi que les stéréotypes sexistes. Les conséquences physiques et psychologiques de ces violences affectent les sociétés impactées et peuvent marquer plusieurs générations. La participation pleine, entière et significative des femmes à toutes les prises de décision, à la table des négociations de paix et dans tous les domaines est essentielle pour prendre en compte de manière satisfaisante la justice et la réparation due aux victimes de violences sexuelles, nécessaires pour mener à bien la réconciliation. Ce Conseil l'a bien identifié avec son agenda Femmes, Paix et Sécurité, qui doit être mis en œuvre. Nous devons ensemble renforcer nos efforts sur ce sujet en vue du sommet de l'avenir en 2024. La prévention des violences sexuelles implique aussi de s'attaquer aux discriminations, je l'ai déjà dit, aux préjugés et stéréotypes. La montée du discours de haine sexiste, misogyne ou homophobe renforce les risques de violences sexistes et sexuelles. Enfin, nous devons adopter les normes les plus protectrices en matière de lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes. Nous plaidons pour l'universalisation de la Convention d'Istanbul du Conseil de l'Europe, instrument international, moderne et protecteur contre les violences faites aux femmes, qui s'applique aussi en temps de conflit armé. Nous nous félicitons que les nouvelles adhésions se soient multipliées depuis 2 ans. Madame la représentante spéciale, chère Hser, chère Nadine, nous vous avons entendu. Soyez assurés que la lutte contre les violences sexuelles restera au cœur des priorités portées par la France au sein de ce Conseil. Elle veillera à la mise en œuvre des résolutions femmes, paix et sécurité et la mise à disposition de ressources adéquates nécessaires pour les équipes sur le terrain. Et je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, Mozambique wishes to express our profound gratitude to the United Kingdom Presidency for organizing this timely and important open debate. We also praise UK's leadership on this matter. We extend our deep appreciation for the comprehensive briefings by the SRSG, Ms. Pramila Patten, and the civil society briefers. Mr. President, we would like to start by reaffirming Mozambique's condemnation in the strongest terms, the gender-based violence in general, and conflict-related sexual violence in particular. It constitutes a war crime and a crime against humanity, as recognized, among others, by Security Council Resolution 1820 of 2008, by the Protocol of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, on the Rights of Women in Africa, also known as the Maputo Protocol. The Secretary General's report on conflict-related sexual violence highlights that the crime persisted and deepened in different parts of the world. It continued to be a tactic of war and terrorism. This is a horrific practice that unfortunately prevails despite the international and regional frameworks. It shows the extent of commitment and action that are required to counter the full scale of the problem. It is therefore with great concern that we see women's and girls' rights continue to be seriously jeopardized and violated. Conflict-related sexual violence disproportionately affects this segment of the society. Refugees and internally displaced people from armed conflicts are also mostly women, girls, and children, as well as people with disabilities and elderly. They are exposed to heightened risks to conflict-related sexual violence. Mr. President, as expressed by His Excellency Felipe Jacinto Nyusi, President of the Republic of Mozambique, during the Security Council's open debate on the protection of civilians held in May this year, the first step towards ending conflict-related sexual violence has to be the cessation of hostilities in all conflicts. Peace is the ultimate guarantee of civilian security. We must therefore take stock of these existing international, regional, and national tools to tackle the root causes of prevailing conflicts. We are aware, however, that making peace or building peace takes its own time and pace. But conflict-related sexual violence cannot be accepted as an inevitable cost of armed conflict. Therefore, all available tools, including legal, policy, diplomatic, and financial, must be mobilized to prevent and mitigate its effects. Mr. President, the implementation of international, regional, and national legal instruments to prevent and address conflict-related sexual violence is of paramount importance. The United Nations and other relevant stakeholders have a pivotal role to continue their support with concrete actions to prevent conflict-related violence all over the world. In this regard, we welcome the efforts made by governments around the world as outlined in the Secretary General's report. We commend their commitment in implementing their legal frameworks with regard to conflict-related sexual violence. Mr. President, in order to address conflict-related sexual violence, it is crucial that we develop holistic approaches. In this regard, we would like to underline the following points. One, we deem it important to adopt and strengthen the existing international legislation at national levels with a focus on investigation and prosecution of perpetrators of conflict-related violence. Two, there is a need to increase training programs for state and civil society actors in matters related to international, regional, and national frameworks on conflict-related sexual violence. Three, we must strengthen the capacity of the justice sector at the national level to identify and assess information on conflict-related violence. Four, we advocate allocating resources for the implementation of national action plans on women, peace, and security. This could strengthen the potential of these instruments through budgeted operational provisions to address the issue. Mr. President, to conclude, Mozambique reiterates its firm commitment to continue implementing measures that can contribute to our collective action in addressing conflict-related sexual violence. It is our conviction that women and girls, the most affected by these criminal acts, can play themselves a transformative role in political, socio-economic, and peace processes. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement. Let me remind all speakers to limit their statements to no more than 3 minutes in order to enable the Council to carry out its work expeditiously. I now give the floor to the representative of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm very pleased to speak on behalf of 66 members of the Group of Friends of Women, Peace and Security, an informal network that represents all 5 regional groups at the UN as well as the EU. I'd like to highlight 4 points. First of all, we categorically condemn the use of sexual and gender-based violence by state and non-state actors in situations of humanitarian crises and conflict-affected settings. Sexual violence, which disproportionately affects women and girls, is not only a human rights violation, it is also an abhorrent act of cruelty, a significant impediment to peace, and an expression of gender equality. We are deeply concerned by the persistent and widespread use of sexual violence and related impunity in many conflict-affected settings, as outlined by the Secretary General in his report. We call on all parties to respect international law and all relevant Security Council resolutions, and to immediately cease all forms of sexual and gender-based violence. Second, we need to ensure that the victims and survivors at the heart of all our efforts to respond to conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence. Victims and survivors have different needs, different perspectives, and can face multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and stigmatization. We must ensure that their human rights are protected and promoted, that they are treated with dignity and respect, are able to obtain access to justice and equality, holistic and comprehensive survivor-centered services, including sexual and reproductive health care services, mental health support, as well as counseling and legal services. But above all, we must ensure that the victims' voices are heard and listened to and heeded. Third, impunity for these crimes must end. Those responsible for such acts must be held accountable. The onus is on all of us to strengthen the rule of law and to ensure that there is independent investigation of and prosecution for conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence. Fourth, we urge the Security Council to use all its tools to support action against conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence as a tactic of war, as a deliberate tactic of war. We strongly encourage the Council to ensure that country mandates emphasize the prevention and the monitoring and response to conflict-related sexual violence. Finally, we encourage the Security Council to invite the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence to regularly brief the Sanctions Committee on this critical question. It is time for urgent action to prevent and respond to conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence and to ensure holistic, comprehensive, survivor-centered, and trauma-informed responses. Si je peux dire seulement un seul mot, dans mon capacité comme représentant du Canada. Pour nous, la chose la plus importante, c'est que nous écoutons les expériences de tous les survivants. Et non seulement que nous écoutons les expériences, mais que nous agissons en réponse à ce que nous avons entendu et ce que nous avons vu. Ça comprend les femmes et les filles, les hommes et les groupes garçons, ainsi que les membres de la communauté LGBTIQ+. Le Canada est déterminé à continuer notre travail avec les survivants et survivantes. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
I thank the representative of Canada for their statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Silvio Gonçalves, Deputy Head of the European Union Delegation to the United Nations.
Thank you, President. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states, the candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova and Bosnia-Herzegovina, the potential candidate country Georgia, as well as Andorra, Monaco and San Marino align themselves with this statement. We reaffirm our long-standing and unwavering commitment to eliminating sexual and gender-based violence in all its forms, in times of peace and times of war. Conflict-related sexual violence is a war crime and a blatant violation of international law, a global threat that knows no borders. We strongly support the work and mandate of SRSG Patten. The report presented today is crucial to shed light on the continued and escalated levels of CRSV, much of which remains underreported and unpunished. We acknowledge and applaud the work of women's civil society organizations who are often the first responders in war and conflict. While under-resourced and deplorably targeted with reprisals, they deliver the support and services that the public and private sector often are not able to provide, including in response to sexual violence. We note with deep concern the use of rape as a tool for oppression, repression, and political intimidation across a number of countries, and the widespread reported use of sexual violence by state actors, such as the Russian armed forces in Ukraine, as well as the increasing trend of sexual violence used by mercenary and private military and security companies in countries like Mali, Myanmar, South Sudan, and Ukraine. These crimes must be punished, and those responsible held accountable. It is the responsibility of all states to prevent and address CRSV and bring perpetrators to justice. The redress for this type of violence needs to be linked to transitional justice processes. At the same time, we need to resolutely implement the international framework that is in place to address these abhorrent crimes and back up our political declarations with action. EU support to eliminating and addressing sexual violence in conflict and emergencies is notable, with projects incorporating response to CRSV amounting to over 100 million euros, and with EU missions and operations continuing to address CGBV, including CRSV, within the scope of their mandates. This year, the EU also has imposed sanctions on individuals and entities in view of their role in committing serious human rights violations and abuses, in particular sexual and gender-based violence. Sexual violence in conflict obliterates humanity. We stand ready to work with the international community to end the impunity of perpetrators, tackle the institutional culture that tolerates the use of sexual violence, and to guarantee access to justice, reparation, and redress for survivors, as well as to reintegration and livelihood. This includes provision of comprehensive sexual and reproductive healthcare services and strengthening of sexual and reproductive health measures as an integral part of compliance with the CRSV frameworks by everyone, the UN and its agencies, but also governments. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Gonzato for his statement. There are still a number of speakers remaining on my list for this meeting. I intend, with the concurrence of members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until 3 p.m. The meeting is suspended.